There is a boy standing at the mouth of a cave, high in the hills of Tuscany, and I want you to see him just for a moment before we let the evening close in around us. He is perhaps 12 years old, maybe a little less, and he has walked farther than he meant to, the way children do when the day is long and no one is calling them home. The grass here is dry and pale gold, the colour of old straw, and it whispers against his legs as he climbs, and above him the sky is that soft, deepening blue that comes just before the light begins to lean toward evening. And there, at the top of a stony slope, where the earth folds back on itself and the rock breaks open, there is a cave. A dark mouth in the hillside, a blackness so complete that it seems less like an absence of light and more like a thing, a presence, a held breath. And the boy stops. He does not go in, and he does not turn away. He simply stands there at the very edge of the dark, one hand resting lightly against the cool stone, and inside him 2 feelings are pulling in opposite directions, so gently and so evenly that he is held perfectly still between them. One of those feelings is fear. Of course it is fear. The dark is cold, and it is deep, and who knows what might be waiting inside it, what creature might be sleeping there, what the ground might do beneath his feet. That is the old wise fear that has kept people safe outside of caves since the very beginning of people. But the other feeling, the one that has him leaning ever so slightly forward, is something harder to name. It is longing, it is wonder, it is the almost unbearable wish to know what marvel might be hidden in there, what strange and beautiful thing the darkness is keeping, what the world looks like in the one place he has not yet been allowed to see. And so he stands, this small boy in the Golden Hills, suspended between the fear that says stay back and the desire that says go closer, go closer. Look, he would remember this moment, or one very like it, for the whole of his long life. And years later, an old man far away, he would write down what it felt like, the way the fear and the wanting rose up in him at the very same instant, the way he crouched at the entrance with his hand shading his brow, straining to see into the dark, and could not tell whether he was more afraid or more full of desire. And we are going to leave him there, just like that, poised at the mouth of the cave, held gently between the two. We will come back to him. We will come back to him at the very end of the night, when all the story has been told, and set him down beside the man he became, and see what the two of them, the boy and the old master, have to say to one another. But that is a long way off. For now, hold him softly in your mind, this boy at the edge of the dark. Do not worry about what he decides. There is all night for that. And now let the hills go quiet, and let the light in the room around you soften too. Let the lamp burn low. You do not need it bright tonight. You do not need it doing much of anything. You have come to the end of your day, whatever kind of day it was, whether it was heavy or light, whether it went the way you hoped or slipped through your fingers entirely, and none of it needs carrying any farther. You may set it all down now. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been holding themselves. Let the pillow take the whole weight of your head, all of it, so that your neck has nothing left to do. Let your breathing slow on its own, without your help, the way it knows how to do when you finally stop asking anything of it. There is nothing you must follow here. There is nothing you must remember, no thread you have to keep hold of. This is a story told slowly, on purpose, and it will keep unspooling in the same soft, unhurried way whether you are awake to hear it or not. You may drift off whenever you like. The story goes on without you, and it will not mind at all. The boy at the cave has a name, and it is a name you already know, even if you have never once thought about him falling asleep or being a child or standing frightened at the edge of anything. His name is Leonardo. Leonardo da Vinci, which means simply Leonardo of Vinci, of the little hill town he came from, the way people were named in those days, after the place that made them. He was born in the spring of the year 1452, in the Tuscan countryside not far from Florence, and he would live for 67 years, and in that time he would become, by the reckoning of nearly everyone who has looked at his life since, the most curious mind the world has ever produced. Not the most powerful, not the richest, not the one who conquered the most or built the largest empire, the most curious, the one who wanted, more than anything, and more constantly than anyone, simply to know. To understand how things worked, why water moved the way it did, how a bird held itself up on the air, what lay beneath the skin, what made a face into that particular face and no other, what the moon was, why the sky was blue, how a smile begins. He was a painter, yes, one of the greatest who ever lived, but that word is far too small a box to hold him. He was also an engineer, an inventor, an anatomist, a student of water and wind and stone, a musician, a designer of machines that would not be built for 400 years, and above all, always a beginner. A beginner of everything, a boy at the mouth of 1,000 caves. And here, right at the start, before we go a single step further into his long life, I want to hand you the question we will carry together all through this night. Not a question to solve, not a puzzle that will keep you awake turning it over, but a soft and open one. The kind you can hold loosely in your palm like a smooth stone while you drift. Here it is. This boy, Leonardo, was born in a small village to a mother who was a poor peasant woman and a father who would never marry her. He was, in the language of his time, illegitimate, born outside of marriage, and because of that, a great many doors that opened easily for other men were closed to him from the very beginning. He had almost no formal schooling. He never learned much Latin, the language of learned men, and he was a little ashamed of that all his life, and called himself, half in jest and half in earnest, a man without letters. He did not go to a great university. He was not the son of a scholar or a prince. He was a village boy who taught himself, out in the fields, by looking. And yet, and here is the gentle wonder of it, this unschooled, illegitimate village boy came to see further into the world than any man of his entire age, further perhaps than anyone had seen before him. How? How does that happen? How does the boy with the fewest advantages become the one who understands the most? And there is a second half to the question, folded into the first, just as soft. This same man, who saw so far and understood so much, who filled thousands and thousands of pages with his looking, finished almost nothing that he began. He left painting after painting unfinished. He walked away from commissions that would have made other men famous. He started grand projects and set them aside, started them and set them aside, all his life, so that the number of works he truly completed is astonishingly small for a man of such gifts. He was, as those who loved him said with a kind of tender exasperation, a man who could begin anything and finish almost nothing. So there is our whole puzzle, and I will set it down now beside you where you can feel it is there without having to hold it. How did the village boy come to see so far, and why did he leave so much undone? Hold that softly. We do not need the answer yet. We will not go looking for it. It will come to us, quietly, all on its own, somewhere in the small hours, the way the best answers always do. For now it is enough simply to have asked. Let us instead do something gentler. Let us look, slowly and with no hurry at all, at the world this boy was born into, the shape of it, the feel of it, the light on it, because it was a rare and remarkable moment to be born, and the time itself is part of the answer to everything that follows. Picture Tuscany then in the middle years of the 15th century, a land of low green and gold hills, rolling one behind another into a soft blue distance, dotted with dark cypress trees standing tall and slender like quiet sentinels. Silvery olive groves on the slopes, their leaves turning and flashing in the wind. Vineyards laid out in patient rows, small stone farmhouses the colour of honey, with red-tiled roofs warmed by the sun. Little walled towns perched on the hilltops, their towers catching the last of the light. And through it all, threading the valleys, the rivers, and one river above all, the Arno, wide and slow and brown, winding down out of the hills toward the sea, carrying boats and timber and the whole life of the region on its back. This was Leonardo's country. This was the land he would walk as a child, watching the water move, watching the birds turn overhead, and it soaked into him so deeply that he would be drawing its rivers and its rocks and its light on his very last pages. An old man in a far-off country, still homesick for these hills. And 30 miles or so down the valley from Vinci, sitting astride that same river Arno, was the city, Florence, Firenze. And you must understand that in these years Florence was not merely a city. It was a kind of miracle that people had somehow decided to build and then to live inside. It was not large as we think of cities, not by our measure. You could walk across the whole of it in half an hour. But into that small space was crowded more genius, more beauty, more restless, blazing invention than had gathered in one place in 1,000 years. The great red dome of the cathedral rode above the rooftops, an engineering marvel so bold that men had argued it could not be built until, stubbornly, magnificently, it was. The streets ran with wool merchants and bankers grown fabulously rich, and with the money of those merchants and bankers came something they had perhaps not expected, a hunger for beauty, an appetite for painters and sculptors and poets and builders, a willingness to pay for wonder. The workshops of the artists stood open to the street, and inside them the future was being invented daily, and over all of it, presiding like a golden sun, was the family of the Medici, the great banking house, and in Leonardo's youth their brightest star, Lorenzo, whom his people called the magnificent, poet, statesman, lover of every beautiful thing, who gathered the finest minds of the age around his table the way another man might gather friends, for something was happening in this small city on the Arno, something that would come to be called, long afterward, the Renaissance, the rebirth. It is a grand word, and I do not want it to sound grand tonight, because the feeling of it was really something quite simple and quite human. It was the feeling of waking up. For long centuries, men had mostly looked backward, or upward, and had been taught that the great things were all in the past or all in heaven, and that a person's task was to accept the world as it was given, and not to pry too far into it. And now, in Florence, in these years, people were beginning, slowly, wonderingly, to look around instead, to look at the world itself, at bodies, at buildings, at the fall of light on a real human face, and to find it endlessly, thrillingly worth looking at. They dug up the old wisdom of the Greeks and the Romans and read it with shining eyes. They measured and drew and questioned. They began to believe, quietly at first and then with growing boldness, that a human being might understand almost anything, might make almost anything, might reach almost as high as the mind could dream. It was a time, you might say, waking up to wonder. And into that waking world, into that exact place and that exact hour, as if the age itself had drawn a long breath and readied itself for someone, there was about to be born the most wondering mind of all. But he is not born yet, not in our story, not tonight. Tonight he is still that boy at the mouth of the cave, held between fear and desire in the golden hills, and the whole enormous life is still ahead of him, unlived, unpainted, unwritten, waiting. We have all the time in the world to reach it. We will go back to the very beginning, to the spring morning of his birth, and the small quiet fact that shaped everything, but not yet, not right now. Right now there is nothing you need to do but rest. Let the hills stay golden, let the boy stand safely where he is, let the lamp burn as low as it likes, or go out altogether. Your breathing has slowed. Feel how much slower it has grown since we began. That is exactly right. That is all that is being asked of you tonight. Let your thoughts drift loose and wander off down the valley toward the river, and if they do not come back, that is well, they know the way. We have only just begun, and the night is long and soft and unhurried, and the whole long life of Leonardo lies waiting, patient as the hills, for whenever you are ready. Rest now. We will begin again in a moment, gently, and you need not be awake to follow. So let us go all the way back now, back before the great city and the golden workshops, back before any of the marvels and the sorrows that we will unfold together across this long night, back to the very beginning of him, to the hour when he was only a small new weight in someone's arms and no one yet knew what he would be. Let the lamp burn low. You do not need to keep your eyes open for this. The story will hold itself together whether you follow every word or slip away for a while and drift back, and it will wait for you, patiently, the way the hills waited for the boy. We are simply going to walk down, slowly, out of that wide waking world of rising Florence into one small green fold of country to the west of it, where the roads turn to stony tracks and the tracks climb up among the olive terraces to a hill town so small you might pass it without noticing, a huddle of pale stone houses and a little fortified tower called Vinci. It is the 15th of April in the year 1452, and it is spring in Tuscany, which is one of the gentlest things the world has to offer. The olives are putting out their small grey-green leaves. The vines are waking on their poles. The hillsides are loud, in the soft way that hillsides are loud, with running water and with birdsong, because the winter rains are draining down through the valleys toward the river, and every fold in the land has its own small stream talking to itself as it goes. And somewhere in that green and running country, in a farmhouse among the hills, or perhaps in the little town itself, a child is born, out of the ordinary way of things, to two people who were never married and never would be. There was no great announcement. There were no bells, no heralds, no painted banners. There was only, we may imagine, a plain room and a tired young woman, and a first thin cry lifting into the Tuscan morning. A grandfather, an old man named Antonio da Vinci, kept the family's little book of notes, the way careful families did, and in his own hand he set down the arrival, plainly and proudly, the birth of a grandson, and the day, and the hour of the night, and that the child was baptized the next morning, with a good crowd of godparents gathered round the font. So even at the very start there is a small warm human record of him, a grandfather writing down the night his grandson came, and that is a good place for us to begin, and a good thing to hold softly as you settle. He was wanted, and he was written down, and he was welcomed. His father was a young man named Sir Piero da Vinci, and the little word in front of the name, that Sir, is worth pausing on for a moment, because it tells you almost the whole shape of the family's hopes. Sir Piero was a notary. In that world a notary was a man of law and letters and standing, a man who drew up the contracts and the wills and the dowries and the deeds by which the whole prosperous machinery of Tuscan life was fastened together, a respectable and rising man in a respectable and rising line. For the Da Vinci had been notaries for generations, and Sir Piero would spend his life in the good grey robes of that trade, going down to Florence on business, building connections, gathering property, ambitious and busy and, we are told, a little distant, a little hard, always looking to the next advantageous marriage and the next useful friend. And the boy's mother was a young woman named Caterina, of whom we know very little for certain, only that she was of humbler people entirely, a peasant girl, a serving woman perhaps, someone of the countryside rather than of the notary's careful class, someone who could never, in the arithmetic of that age, have been a wife for a man like Sir Piero. So the two of them made a child together, in the ordinary human way, and then their paths simply divided again, as everyone had always known they would. Caterina was soon married off, tidily, to a local man, a kiln worker of the district, a man who burned lime and fired clay in the valley, and she went to him and made her own life, and had her own other children, not far away, just over the hills. And she will come back into this story, very gently, near its very end, an old woman travelling a long way to find her son again, but we do not need that yet. Set it down softly, we will come to it. And here, right at the threshold of his life, is the small, quiet fact that shaped everything, and I want to lay it in your hands slowly, because it is one of the strangest and kindest turns in the whole long tale, and because it is exactly the kind of thing that only looks like misfortune until you have watched enough of a life to see what it truly was. The child was illegitimate. He was born, as they said then, outside of marriage. And in that time and that place this closed a particular door to him, quietly and completely, and the door it closed was the family door, the notary's door, because the guild of notaries, that proud and profitable guild in which his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather had all made their careers, did not admit men born out of wedlock. It simply would not have him. However clever he might turn out to be, however quick with a pen, the safe and settled road that his own name seemed to promise, the road of contracts and courtrooms and steady respectable gain, was shut against him before he could so much as walk. And you might think, lying there, that this was a hard thing, a cold beginning, a boy shut out of his father's world. But hold it a moment longer, and turn it over, the way you would turn a smooth stone in your palm, and feel the other side of it warm in your hand, because that closed door was the very thing that set him free. A boy who could not become a notary was a boy who did not have to become a notary. A boy with no fixed slot waiting to swallow him, no family trade laid out like a suit of clothes he was expected to grow into. The shut door of the guild left the whole rest of the world standing open. It left him free to become something the guilds had no name for at all, something no one in that careful lettered family had ever imagined a Da Vinci might be. Hold that gently. We will watch that open door for the rest of the night. But all of that is still far off, and the boy knows nothing of guilds and doors. For now he is simply a small child growing up in the hills, and this is the part of his life I love the most to dwell on, because it is so quiet and so green, and because so much of the vast, strange man he became was already there, folded up small, in the boy who wandered these slopes. He was raised, in the main, not in some grand house, but in the easy rough plenty of the family's country holdings, among grandparents and uncles, out where the land itself was the schoolroom. His grandfather Antonio, the same old man who wrote down the night of his birth, was there, elderly and kindly, a man who had spent his long life close to the soil. And best of all, for a boy like this one, there was his uncle, Francesco, his father's younger brother, an easy-going, unhurried man who had no great ambitions to go down to the city and make his fortune, who wanted nothing more than to stay among the vines and the olives and the animals and the streams, working the land and loving it, and who took the small nephew along with him wherever he went. Picture the two of them, the grown man in no hurry and the wide-eyed child, walking out together in the early morning across the terraces, up along the goat paths, into the woods and down to the water, the uncle pointing at this and that, the boy trotting behind and stopping, always stopping, to look. That companionship was one of the great soft gifts of his childhood. In an age when many fathers were stern and many boys were beaten towards some useful purpose, this one had an uncle who simply let him wander and wonder, who fed his looking instead of stamping it out. And oh, how the boy looked! This is the thing that everyone who ever tried to tell his story has fastened on, because it is so plainly the seed of all the rest. He looked at everything, endlessly, with a patience that seems almost impossible in a small child. He would crouch by one of those hillside streams for what must have felt to a grown-up like half a day, watching the water, watching the way it curled and braided over the stones, the way it dug little hollows and spun little whirlpools, and carried a leaf spinning down and under and up again, the way the light came down through it and lay wavering on the sand of the bed. He watched birds, not the way most children watch birds glancingly, but truly, watching how a hawk hung motionless on the wind with its wing-tip feathers spread like fingers, how the small birds burst up all together out of a field, how a wing beat and folded and beat again. He watched plants opening and the veins in a leaf, and the way a flower turned its face across the day. He watched light itself, and shadow, the soft grey edges where a shadow met the sun, the way the world went blue and gentle in the distance, and sharp and warm up close. He was, from the very beginning, a watcher, a boy who found more in a single stream than most men find in a library, and who could stand at the edge of a thing and simply drink it in until it had gone all the way inside him. And somewhere up in those same hills, the old tellers say, there was a cave, a dark mouth in the rock. And the boy came to it one day on his wanderings and stood before it, held between two feelings, a plain animal fear of the blackness and the cold breath coming out of it, and a deeper, stronger pull, a longing to know what marvel might be hidden inside. You need not carry that too closely tonight. But notice that it was already in him, that particular tug, the fear and the wanting, and notice which one, even then, was the stronger. Hold that softly. We will find him at the mouth of that cave again before the night is through. And with the looking came the drawing, because the hand of this child could not leave alone what the eye of this child had found. He drew constantly on whatever came to hand, the way other children breathe. He drew the water and the birds and the plants and the faces of the country people and the animals in the yard and the strange knots and eddies of things, and he drew them, everyone agrees, with a quickness and a rightness that was simply not natural in one so young, a line that seemed to know the living thing from the inside. And here in the small hand of the country boy, two of the little mysteries appear that would follow him all his life, and I want to name them for you softly, because they are such tender, curious things. The first is that he was left-handed, and stayed so in an age that thought the left hand clumsy or unlucky and tried to train it out of every child, and he simply would not be trained out of it, and so he drew and wrote his whole life through with the left hand, and it gave his line a particular slope and a particular grace. And the second, bound up with the first, is that when he came to write, he wrote backward. He wrote from the right side of the page to the left, and formed his letters in reverse, so that his pages, to your eye or mine, look like a soft private code. A script that only gives up its meaning when you hold it to a looking glass and let the mirror turn it round the right way. Mirror writing, they call it. No one is entirely sure why he did it. Perhaps it simply came easier to a left hand, drawing the pen inward across the page instead of pushing it out and smearing the wet ink. Perhaps it was a little wall of privacy he liked to keep around his thoughts. It scarcely matters why. What matters, and what is so lovely to picture, is the boy already there in the man, a left-handed child in the Tuscan hills filling the margins of his world with backward words and living lines that no one else could quite read. So that is the temperament we must fix in our minds before we let this chapter close, the shape of the soul that all the rest will grow from. He was dreamy. He was tender-hearted, so gentle, the old stories say, that he could not bear cruelty to a living creature, and would sooner watch a bird than cage it. He was distractible, forever wandering off from the thing in front of him towards some new thing that had caught his eye, a beginner of 100 wonders, and even then, we may guess, a finisher of rather few, though no one minded yet in a child. And above all he was curious, insatiably, restlessly, joyfully curious, hungry to know how everything worked, and why everything was as it was, far more at home crouched by a running stream than sitting still in any schoolroom. And a schoolroom, in truth, was much of what he missed. He got the ordinary rough country learning of the day, enough reading, a little reckoning with numbers. The abacus and the sums a merchant's son might need, but he was never sent to the fine schools where boys of the better families learnt their Latin and their Greek and their grand old authors. That door, like the notary's door, was mostly shut to him, and it left a small ache in him that lasted. A man who would one day call himself, with a rueful pride, an unlettered man, a man without book learning, who had to find things out for himself by looking rather than by being told. Set that down beside the cave and the closed guild, and hold all three together loosely, because between them they are almost the whole of the puzzle we are carrying through this night. An unschooled boy, shut out of the settled roads, teaching himself the world with his own two eyes. And then, One day, his father looked at him. Sir Piero, the busy notary, the distant, ambitious man down in his affairs, came at last to really see the drawings his strange country son was always making. The sheets covered with water and birds and faces, that living, unteachable line. We do not know the exact hour or the exact sheet that did it, but somewhere in the boy's boyhood the father stopped, and looked properly, and understood, in the way that even a hard, practical man can suddenly understand, that this was not the ordinary scribbling of an ordinary child, that there was something here he had no name for and no box to put it in, a gift so plain and so astonishing that it could not simply be left to run wild in the hills forever. Whatever this boy was, he was not going to spend his life burning lime beside his mother's husband or wandering the goat paths with his uncle Francesco. Something would have to be done with a gift like that. Someone would have to be found who could teach it, and shape it, and set it to work. And so, quietly in the mind of the father, a decision began to form, a decision that would take the dreaming left-handed boy down out of the green hills at last, along the river road, and into the golden noise of the greatest city in the world. But that road is for tomorrow's part of the night, and there is no hurry in it at all. For now let the boy stay where he is happiest, out on the warm terraces above Vinci, in the last of the spring light. Crouched at the edge of his little stream, watching the water braid and turn and carry its leaf away, the sheet of drawings loose in his left hand, the whole long, astonishing life still folded up small and unopened inside him, and nothing yet decided, and nothing yet begun. Let your breath go long and slow, let the hills hold him, and let the quiet hold you. We have come only to the very start of him, and we have all the rest of the night. And so the father made his quiet decision, the way a careful man makes any decision, slowly, weighing it, turning it over in his mind on the long ride between Vinci and the city. And the decision was this, that a gift like the one his son carried in those restless hands could not be left to wander the hills forever, could not be spent on riverbanks and the wings of birds and the shapes of clouds, that it must be carried somewhere it could be shaped and set to use. Let your shoulders come down now, and let the lamp burn low, for there is nothing in this part of the story that will trouble you. It is only a father, and a boy of about 14, and a bundle of drawings tied with string, and a road that runs down out of the green hills toward the golden roofs of Florence. Sir Piero was a notary, remember, a man of documents and seals and careful signatures, a man who knew everyone worth knowing in the city, and he had, we are told, a friend among the workshops there, and one day he untied that bundle of the boy's sketches, and he took them down from the country into the town, to show them to a man who would know what they were worth. Picture the road, if it helps you drift, the white dust of it, the olive trees silver in the heat, the cypresses standing like dark candles along the ridges, and below, at last, the city in its ring of walls, the great dome not yet finished in the old days, but rising, the river Arno winding through it all like a ribbon of pale bronze. Florence. You have heard the name. Hold it softly now, for this is where the boy will become the man. It was the richest and the most restless city in the world in those years, a city of wool and silk and banking, of gold florins that travelled to every corner of the earth, a city where merchants who had made their fortunes in cloth and coin now poured that fortune into beauty, into paintings and statues and buildings and books, as though the whole town had decided all at once that it wished to be remembered forever. And over it in these years presided a young man not so much older than Leonardo himself, Lorenzo de' Medici, whom they called the Magnificent, a banker's grandson, a poet, a collector, a keeper of philosophers and sculptors, a man who understood that a city is remembered not for its wars, but for its wonders. You need not keep any of these names. They will keep themselves. Only feel the warmth of the place. A city awake and glittering and hungry to make things. And into it, out of the quiet hills, comes our shy left-handed boy with his bundle of drawings. The man Sir Piero brought those drawings to was named Andrea del Verrocchio, and his workshop, his bottega, they called it, the word simply meant a shop, a place of work, was the busiest and the most celebrated in all of Florence. And here I want you to let go of any idea you might have of an artist alone in a silent room with a single canvas. For that is not what a bottega was at all, not in the least. A bottega was a workshop, a factory of beautiful things, loud and crowded and cluttered and warm. And Verrocchio was not merely a painter, but a sculptor and a goldsmith and a bronze caster and an engineer all at once. A man who could turn his hand to anything a wealthy patron might order: an altarpiece, a tomb, a suit of ceremonial armour, a fountain, a bell, a great bronze ball to be lifted to the very top of the cathedral dome. Whatever the city needed made, in gold or in paint or in stone or in metal, it came, as like as not, through Verrocchio's crowded door. And the master did not do all of it himself, of course he did not. He kept a household of apprentices and journeymen and boys, some grinding, some sweeping, some mixing, some painting the dull backgrounds while he saved the faces and the hands for himself. And into that household, that noisy, affectionate family of the hand, young Leonardo was received. Whether the master saw the drawings and gasped, whether he sat the boy down that very hour, whether he simply nodded and said the country lad might stay and sweep and see if he was any use, we do not truly know. And it scarcely matters, for they told the story afterward that Verrocchio looked at those sketches and knew at once he was holding something rare, and even if that is only a tale, it is a tale worth keeping, because it is very likely close to true. So let us say the boy stayed. Let us say he climbed the stairs to that upper room full of light and dust and the smell of linseed oil and hot metal, and he set down his bundle, and there in that shop over the years that followed, he was given the finest education a pair of hands has ever received. For think of what he learnt there, and learnt by doing, which is the only way the hand ever truly learns anything. He learnt to grind the pigments, the raw stones and earths and dried insects and precious blue lapis carried all the way from distant mountains, crushed on a slab with a muller, ground finer and finer and finer, until the colour woke up under the stone and turned to powder soft as flour, and then mixed with oil or with egg into paint. He learned to prepare the wooden panels, to sand them and coat them with layer upon patient layer of white gesso until they were smooth as ivory and ready to receive an image. He learned to stretch and size, to mix the plaster for a fresco so that it would take the colour while it was still wet, to lay the gold leaf so thin it was almost not there at all, thinner than a breath, and to burnish it until it glowed. He learned to model in clay and wax, to build the armature of a statue, to make the moulds, and then, and this was the marvel of that particular shop, he learned to cast in bronze, to build the furnace and melt the metal to a river of fire and pour it, in one held breath, into the waiting mould, an art half sculpture and half sorcery and half plain engineering. And yes, I know that is three halves, but that is rather the point of it, for in Verrocchio's shop there were no clean lines between one kind of knowing and another. Painting flowed into sculpture, and sculpture into metalwork, and metalwork into machinery, and machinery into architecture, and a boy who was curious about all of it, who could not choose between them, who wanted to know how everything was made and how everything worked, such a boy had wandered, quite by his father's accident, into precisely the one place in the world built to feed a hunger like his. And I want you to feel, for a moment, the plain daily rhythm of that place, because there is something restful in it, something to breathe along with. The early light coming grey and then gold through the high windows, the apprentices arriving, the fire being coaxed awake under the crucibles, the slow rasp of a muller on a grinding stone somewhere in the corner, the tap and scrape of a chisel, the low talk, the smell of oil and wax and warm bronze and turpentine all mixed together. A commission set up on its easel to be worked at hour by hour, day by day, patient, unhurried, a little more each morning. Nobody rushing. A boy sweeping the shavings. The master moving from bench to bench, correcting a line here, a proportion there, praising, frowning, teaching without ever quite calling it teaching. It was a good place to be young, and a good place to learn, and it is a good place to let your thoughts settle now, in the warm dim of that busy room, as the paint dried slow on the panels and the day went by. And he was good. Oh, he was good from the very start, and everyone in the shop could see it. That left hand that had always been drawing, that had covered the margins of his boyhood with birds and water and the faces of old men. Now it had proper materials, proper teaching, proper reason to work, and it flew. He drew constantly, they say, everything and anyone, the way another child might hum without knowing he was doing it. He was beautiful too, we are told. A handsome, graceful, gentle youth, strong and quick, with a way of dressing finely and a soft voice, and a laugh that people remembered, kind to animals, buying caged birds in the market, so the old story goes, only to open the cage and let them go free. Set that down for now, we do not need it yet, only feel the shape of him, a young man everyone liked, and no one could quite hold, quick to begin, and slow, so slow, to finish, forever wandering off after the next question. The pattern is there already, you see, gentle and quiet, at the very start. But let it rest. Now here is the story the whole city would tell afterward, and it is my favourite of the workshop years, so let the lamp burn a little lower, and I will tell it as they told it, and you may believe as much or as little of it as you please. Verrocchio was painting a picture, a baptism of Christ, the scene where the water is poured and the sky opens, and, as was the custom in a bottega, he let his apprentices help him with the lesser parts, the parts that would not draw the eye. And to young Leonardo he gave a small thing, off to the side, a kneeling angel, one of two, holding the robes and looking on. It was the sort of task you give a promising boy, a corner of the panel, nothing that would matter much. And Leonardo painted his angel, and when the master looked at what the boy had done, so the legend runs, he set down his brush and never took it up again. For the angel Leonardo had painted was so alive, so soft and true and tender, the turn of the head so natural, the light on the hair so gentle, the whole small figure breathing in a way that paint had never quite breathed before, that beside it the master's own figures looked stiff, and the master looked, and he understood that the pupil had already gone past the teacher, and being a good man, and not a jealous one, he was glad, and he laid the brush down and gave himself to sculpture and to bronze from that day on. Now, whether it happened exactly so, whether he truly never painted again, whether a master would abandon his whole art over a single angel, we cannot say, and honest people have always doubted the tidy shape of it. But whether it happened or not scarcely matters, for they told it, and they went on telling it for 500 years, and the reason they told it is the thing that is true underneath it, that the boy from Vinci, still only a pupil, still grinding another man's pigments, was already painting things no one had ever quite managed to paint. Life itself, breath itself, the soft edge where a thing meets the air around it. That much is true, angel or no angel. Hold that softly and let it warm you as you lie there. The years in the shop went on, gentle and full. He stayed longer than most, longer than a pupil needed to, even after he had learned all a pupil could learn, because a bottega was a good place to be, a home really, and there was always more to try, more to make, more machines to sketch in the margins while a commission waited. And around the workshop the whole golden city hummed and glittered, the festivals in the great square, the processions and the jousts, the Medici gardens where old broken statues from ancient Rome were set out among the trees for young artists to come and study, the talk of poets and philosophers, the new learning waking everywhere like a spring. It was, for a young man of boundless curiosity, very nearly paradise. A city that made things and prized the making of them, ruled by a man who loved beauty more than power. And Leonardo, moving through it in his fine clothes with his sketchbook always somewhere near his hand, drinking it all in, missing nothing, the fall of light on a wall, the muscle of a horse, the eddy of the river under a bridge, Leonardo was becoming, without hurry, without noise, the finest young artist the city had. In time, he was past 20 now. The moment came that comes to every apprentice who has learnt all his master can teach. He was entered into the guild, the company of the painters of Florence, which meant that in the eyes of the city he was no longer a boy holding another man's robes and grinding another man's blue. He was a master in his own right, free to take his own commissions, to run his own shop, to sign his own name to his own work. The village boy who could never be a notary, who had been shut out of his father's respectable guild by the small circumstance of his birth, that boy had walked in through another door entirely and made himself a master of a thing the notaries could never do. And yet, even in that, even in the very triumph of it, you can already feel the whole rest of the story folded up quietly inside, for he did not rush to leave Verrocchio, did not hurry to set up on his own and grind out altarpiece after altarpiece and grow rich and settled. He lingered, he wandered, he began things, and drifted from them, gifted beyond any measure the city had, and already, ever so gently, impossible to pin down. And there, for tonight, we can let him rest, a young master in the Golden City, at the very top of a long white road, everything ahead of him and nothing yet gone wrong, his hands full of skill and his head full of questions, the light of Florence on his face. Somewhere far back behind him, in the green hills, a boy still stands at the mouth of a dark cave, half in fear and half in longing. But you needn't reach for him now. He is safe there. He will keep. Let your breathing go slow and even. Let the small sounds of the room fade. The story is in good order, and it goes on gently whether you follow it or not. So if you feel yourself beginning to sink down into the soft dark, do not fight it. Let go and drift, and we will find the young master again on the far side of sleep, when he takes up his own brush at last. And so he stepped out of the workshop's shadow as a master in his own right, a young man of perhaps 20, and Florence lay open before him like a hand held out in welcome. Let the lamp burn low now, lower than before, for there is no hurry in what comes next, and nothing here can trouble you. You may let your shoulders come down, and your breath go slow, and if you drift away for a while the story will keep on without you, the way the Arno keeps on flowing whether anyone stands upon its bridges or not. Picture him there, this new-made master, walking the narrow streets of the Golden City with his fine clothes and his easy grace, for they said he was beautiful to look at, tall and strong, so gentle-handed he could bend iron, and yet would stop to buy caged birds in the market, only to open the little doors and set them loose into the sky. Hold that image softly, the birds lifting up out of his palms, because it tells you something about the man that all the great paintings in the world could not, and we will come back to it, gently, when the time is right. He was free now, you see, free in a way that few men of his day were free. He belonged to no guild that could command him. He had no father's trade to inherit. He had no wife, no children, no land to keep him rooted to one hillside. He had only his hands and his eyes and that endless, patient hunger to know, and a city full of men willing to pay for what those hands could make. Commissions came to him. Great families wanted altarpieces, monks wanted panels for their chapels, and the young master's name began to be spoken with respect and with a small growing puzzlement. For something curious was already beginning to show itself, something that would follow him all the length of his long life, and you may have guessed already what it was. He was slow. He was wonderfully, maddeningly, dreamily slow. Set that down for now. We will pick it up again in just a moment, but let it rest lightly in your mind, the way a leaf rests on the surface of still water before it drifts on. For here is the thing about young Leonardo the master, the thing his patrons learned and his rivals whispered about, and the good monks who paid him came slowly and sadly to understand. He would take a commission, and he would think about it, and he would begin, and he would fill page after page with studies more beautiful than the finished works of lesser men. And then, before it was done, some new question would come to him, some new wonder would catch the corner of his eye, and he would be gone, off after it like a boy chasing a kingfisher down a stream. It was never idleness, never carelessness, never a lack of love for the work. It was the opposite. It was that the world was simply too full of marvels for one man to finish looking, and looking for Leonardo was the truest kind of work there was. And the great emblem of all this, the first and clearest sign of the pattern that would shape his whole life, hangs unfinished to this very day, and its name is the Adoration of the Magi. The monks of a place called San Donato asked him for it, a grand painting of the wise men come to kneel before the newborn child, and Leonardo threw himself into it with all the force of his young genius. He drew and drew. He studied how a crowd of figures might swirl and press around a single still centre, how the wise old kings might bow, how the horses might rear in the background, how light might fall and shadow gather. The drawings that survive are astonishing, full of movement and feeling, faces caught in wonder and in doubt, a whole human world crowding in toward the quiet mother and her child. He laid the great panel out. He began to lay in the browns and the shadows, working from dark toward light, the very ground and underpainting of the thing. And then hold this gently, for it is tender rather than sad. Then he stopped. He simply stopped. He never finished it. He left it a great brown storm of half-made figures, ghosts rising out of the shadow, the Virgin's face a soft blur, the whole thing suspended forever in the moment of becoming. And you know, it is one of the most beautiful things he ever made, precisely because it was never finished. There is something in that unfinished panel that a completed painting could never hold. Some sense of a mind caught in the very act of dreaming, of a world still forming out of darkness, still deciding what it would be. Whether he stopped because a greater offer called him away, or because the problem of it grew larger than the panel could contain, or simply because the questions inside it had led him somewhere the painting could not follow, nobody can truly say. But there it is, the first of many, the beginning of the great puzzle we are carrying softly through the night, and you may let it rest now, unfinished and lovely, the wise men forever kneeling in the brown gloom, forever about to see the child they have crossed the world to find. Now, while his brush moved slowly, or stopped altogether, something else was beginning, quietly, off to the side, in the odd hours and the evenings, and this, though almost no one knew it at the time, was the real work of his life. The notebooks were beginning. Let me tell you about the notebooks, because if you remember nothing else of this long night, it would be a fine thing to remember these. He began to carry with him small bound books of paper, hung at his belt, and into them he poured everything. Whatever crossed his path and caught his restless attention. He drew what he saw, and he wrote what he wondered, and he did it in that strange backward hand of his, the mirror writing, the letters flowing from right to left across the page, so that you must hold the pages up to a looking-glass to read them plainly. His left hand moving backward across the paper, his questions marching the wrong way, a private world folded in upon itself. People have argued for 500 years about why he wrote that way. Some say it was to keep his thoughts secret, to guard his discoveries from prying eyes. Others say, more simply and more sweetly, that he was left-handed, and that dragging a left hand from left to right across wet ink would only smear it, and so the boy who taught himself to write found it easier, kinder to the page, to run the other way. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was neither. And it was only the shape his mind naturally took, a mind that saw the world a little sideways to everyone else and set it down accordingly. Whatever the reason, into those backward pages went a river, a flood, a deluge of wondering that has no equal in all the history of the world. He wondered about water. Oh, how he wondered about water, all his life long, the way it curled and eddied around a post set in a stream, the way it fell and foamed, the way it carried and carved and shaped the land. He filled pages with the swirl and braid of currents, drawing the invisible made visible, the shape of a thing that has no shape. He wondered about the wind, and about birds, watching them wheel above the Tuscan hills as he had watched them since he was a boy, asking how a heavy body could hang upon thin air, how a wing pressed down and the whole creature rose. He wondered about muscle, about how a man's arm bent and a leg pushed and a face made a smile, tracing the cords and levers beneath the skin. He wondered about machines, drawing gears and screws and cranes and strange contraptions of pulley and lever, war engines and water-lifting devices and things that would not be built for 400 years. He wondered about light and shadow and how the eye sees, and how a shell came to be high on a mountain far from any sea. He asked, and he asked, and he asked, and he almost never stopped to give an answer, because for Leonardo, and hold this close, the question was the treasure, and the answer was only the small dull coin you traded the wonder away for. And mixed in among the great questions were the small ones, the homely ones, the ones that make you love him, reminders to himself to ask a certain man how the Flemish set their colours, or to find out why the sky is blue, or how the woodpecker's tongue is made. Little lists of the books he owned, and the coins he had spent, and the debts he was owed. Shopping errands. Jokes and riddles. Sketches of the faces he passed in the street, an old man with a great hooked nose, a laughing boy, a grotesque and comical profile drawn for the pure pleasure of the line. He drew cats tumbling and stretching and curling to sleep, dozens of cats on a single page, studying how a soft body moves. He drew the tangle of a rush of water, and beside it, without any seam between them, the tangle of a woman's braided hair, for to his eye they were the same flowing thing, the same secret law running through the world in 1,000 different dresses. Nothing was beneath his notice. Nothing was too small to wonder at. That, perhaps more than all the grand machines, is the truest picture of his mind, a mind that found the whole universe interesting and could not, would not, pick and choose. Thousands of pages, thousands upon thousands, across all the years to come, and almost none of it shown to anyone, almost none of it made into a book or a lesson or a finished thing the world could use. He simply gathered it, the way a man might gather wildflowers on a hillside for no reason but that they were lovely, and they were there. Set that beside the unfinished adoration, and you begin to see the whole shape of him, the man who finished almost nothing and yet saw almost everything. And let it rest there, softly, for we do not need to solve it yet. We have all night, and the puzzle is a gentle one. Now there is one small cloud that passes across these bright years, and I will tell it to you the way you tell a hard thing to a tired child, quietly and without weight, and then let it go by. In the spring of the year 1476, when Leonardo was still a young man, an anonymous note was dropped into one of the boxes the city of Florence kept for accusations, a note naming him and some others in a charge of misconduct. It was the sort of thing that happened in that city, a nameless hand, a rumour without a face. And here is the whole of it, the part that matters and the part you may carry off to sleep without a single care, for the charge came to nothing. No accuser ever stood forth. No proof was ever brought. The matter was dismissed, and the papers closed, and the young man walked free. And that is the end of it. It touched him, we may think, the way an unkind word touches anyone, a shadow of a shadow, and perhaps it is part of why he grew ever more private, ever more careful, ever more inclined to keep his truest thoughts folded away in that backward-running hand where no stranger could read them. But it was a cloud, only a cloud, and it drifted across the sun and was gone, and the sky was blue again behind it. Let it pass. We need it no more. For the years went on, and Florence, golden Florence, began, strangely, to feel small to him. It was a city crowded with genius, you see, thick with brilliant men all elbowing for the same commissions, all praised by the same patrons, all working under the great shadow of Lorenzo the Magnificent and the ancient rivalries of the guilds. There were painters everywhere, and sculptors and goldsmiths and poets, and philosophers arguing in the loggias, and a young man who dreamed of building bridges and flying machines and casting horses larger than any ever made, might well feel that this beautiful, busy city had no room in it quite large enough for the size of what he wished to do. He was known here, and admired here, and yet somehow not quite used here, not set to the vast task his mind was reaching toward. A man may be surrounded by praise and still feel he is waiting for his true life to begin. And so, slowly, the way a river gathers itself before it turns, his thoughts began to travel north. There was a city up there beyond the hills and the plains, a great rich city ruled by a powerful man, a city of arms and industry and ambition, a city that might have need of an engineer who could also paint, or a painter who could also build engines of war and lift rivers and raise monuments to the glory of a duke. Milan, he said the name to himself perhaps, turning it over. Milan, with a Sforza ruled, where a man with bold enough dreams and a bold enough letter might make himself indispensable. Florence had raised him and taught him and made him a master, and Florence would always be, in some deep way, his home and his mother city, the golden place along the Arno where the birds rose out of his opened hands. But a man such as this was made for setting out, for standing at the mouth of some new dark opening in the world and choosing, always choosing, to walk in and see. So let him stand there, at the edge of these Florentine years, his notebooks full and his great painting unfinished behind him, his fine restless mind already crossing the mountains before his feet have taken a single step. Let the lamp burn lower still. There is nothing to decide tonight, nothing to hurry toward, only a young man in a golden city gathering himself for a journey, and the road north lying quiet and open in the last of the light. You may drift off whenever you like, and I will carry him gently onward, over the hills and out of Tuscany, toward the great court that is waiting for him in the north, and it will all be here, softly, when you wish to find it again. And so he went north, the way a river goes when it has found its slope at last, unhurried but certain, and the road carried him out of Tuscany and up toward the great flat plain of Lombardy, toward the city of Milan, where a duke he had never met was waiting without knowing he was waiting. Let the lamp burn low now, lower than before, and let the road unspool beneath him while you lie still. There is nothing on this road that can reach you. There is only a man in his early 30s, tall and fair and beautifully dressed, for he was always vain about his clothes in the gentlest way, riding north with a bundle of drawings and a heart full of half-finished questions, leaving behind the golden city that had made him, and had not, in the end, quite known what to do with him. You may drift off whenever you like. The story goes on without you, all the way to Milan and beyond, and it will still be here, softly, if you wish to follow. Milan was not Florence. Where Florence was slender and clever and full of poets, Milan was broad and heavy and rich, a city of soldiers and merchants and enormous ambition, ruled in those years by a dark, shrewd, watchful man named Ludovico Sforza, whom everyone called Il Moro the Moor for his dark complexion, or perhaps for the mulberry tree that was his emblem. No one was ever quite sure. And it scarcely matters. Ludovico was not truly the duke, not at first. He ruled in the name of a boy-nephew and held the real power in his own too careful hands, and he wanted, more than almost anything, to be thought magnificent. He wanted his court to blaze. He wanted engineers who could raise walls and turn rivers, and armourers who could forge terrible new weapons. And above all he wanted a monument to his family that would make the whole of Italy fall silent and stare. Into this hunger, quietly came Leonardo. Hold that softly. A man who longed to be magnificent, and a man who could imagine anything. They were made to find each other. Now there is a famous letter, and we should sit with it a while, because it tells you something tender and strange about the man you are coming to know. Leonardo, wanting a place at the Milanese court, wrote to Ludovico, or drafted such a letter at least, for a copy survives in his own hand among the notebooks, and in it he set out, point by point, all the things he could do. And here is the strange, sweet thing. He did not begin with painting. He did not lead with the angel that had silenced his master, nor with the drawings that had already made men marvel. No, he offered himself first and foremost as a military engineer. I can build bridges, he wrote, light and strong and easy to carry. I know how to drain the water from moats and make scaling ladders and strange machines for laying siege. I can make cannon of a beautiful and useful kind, and covered chariots, safe and unassailable, and mortars and catapults and engines of war not in common use. I can conduct water from one place to another. And then, at the very end, almost as an afterthought, tucked in like a small quiet thing he had nearly forgotten to mention, also, he wrote, I can carry out sculpture in marble, bronze, and clay. And in painting I can do as much as any other, whoever he may be. In painting I can do as much as any other, from the man who painted the Mona Lisa. Set that beside your pillow and smile at it. He led with the war machines because that was what the Duke wished to buy, and he wrote what would open the door. But you can feel, can't you, the whole vast restless range of him pressing up through that letter, the engineer and the sculptor and the painter and the dreamer of water, all crowded together in one modest closing line. He contained so many men that he hardly knew which one to sell. Whether the letter was ever truly sent, or was only drafted and set aside, no one can say for certain, but it survives, and it is so entirely him that it hardly matters. It meant something. It still does. And there is a legend, and you know by now that we love our legends here and hold them up to the light without minding too much, whether they are solid gold or gilded. The legend says that when Leonardo first came before Ludovico Sforza, he came not with drawings of cannon at all, but with a musical instrument. A lyre he had made himself, shaped like a horse's skull fashioned of silver, so that its strange bright metal gave the notes a sweeter and more carrying tone than any wooden lyre could. And they say he played it, this beautiful man with the silver horse skull lyre, and sang, for his voice was said to be lovely, and improvised verses as he went. And that the whole court fell quiet and then delighted, and that this, not the war machines, not the letter, this was how he won his place. Whether it happened just so, we cannot know. But picture it anyway, softly, before you sleep. The great hall, the candles, the dark watchful Duke, and a stranger from Florence bowing over an instrument of silver that no one had ever seen the like of, drawing out a music that seemed to come from some place further away than music usually comes from. That was the door he walked through. However he walked through it, he was in. And for the next 17 years, the longest settled stretch of his whole wandering life, Milan was his home, and Ludovico Sforza was his patron, and Leonardo became the ornament of that court, the man who could do everything. He was court painter, yes, but he was so much more than that, and this is the part that will loosen your shoulders if you let it, because it is such a happy, busy, prosperous time. He designed weapons for the Duke as promised. He planned waterworks, canals and locks and sluices to carry the water of Lombardy where it was wanted, for he loved water above almost all things and could watch it move for hours, and here at last he was paid to think about it. He advised on buildings and domes and fortifications. He sketched ideal cities, clean cities with the streets stacked one above another so that the carts and the filth ran below and the people walked in air and light above. Cities dreamed up during a plague when he grieved over how men crowded and sickened. He turned his mind to everything, and the Duke let him, and there was gold in his purse, and a roof over his head, and a workshop of his own with apprentices in it, and he became the master of the court's pleasures. This too. When there was a wedding, or a feast, or a triumph to be staged, it was Leonardo who dreamed it. He built moving stages and mechanical beasts. He made costumes stiff with wonder, and for one great festival, the Feast of Paradise, they called it, he is said to have built a vast revolving dome of the heavens, with the planets turning in their spheres and a child, or an actor, cast as each of the gods, so that when it opened the whole court gasped as if the sky itself had come down into the room to celebrate. Think of that curious boy in the Tuscan hills, who watched the light and the water and the birds because he could not help it, now grown and paid and honoured to make the heavens turn for a duke. There is a rightness to it that is very restful. He had found, for a while, a place that had room for all of him. Or nearly all. Because underneath the festivals and the waterworks, one great dream was growing in these years, slowly, hugely, and you should hold it gently, for it will matter later, and it is one of the tenderest sorrows of his whole story, though tonight it is only a hope, only a beginning, and we will let it stay that way. Ludovico wanted a monument to his father, Francesco Sforza, the soldier who had founded the family's fortune. And not a small monument. He wanted a horse, a bronze horse, with the great warrior mounted upon it, and he wanted it to be the largest bronze horse the world had ever seen, larger than the famous horses of Rome, larger than anything the ancients had cast. And he gave this dream to Leonardo, and Leonardo, who never in his life could resist a thing that had never been done before, took it up with his whole heart. He studied horses as no one had studied them. He went to the Duke's stables and drew the living animals from every side, the muscles and the joints and the way the weight shifted from leg to leg, the flare of the nostril and the arch of the neck, page after page after page. For he would not make a horse from other men's horses, he would make it from the truth of the animal itself. And he wrestled with the sheer size of it, with the problem of how you could ever cast so much bronze at once without it cracking or cooling wrong, and he filled his notebooks with furnaces and moulds and clever schemes for pouring the metal all together. And slowly, over years, in the courtyard of the Corte Vecchia where he worked, the horse rose. Not in bronze, not yet. In clay, a giant of clay, a colossus, 4 times the height of a man and more. A mountain of a horse standing in the Milanese light, and when at last it was finished and shown, the whole city came to see it, and could not believe that human hands had made it. They called it simply Il Caio, the horse, as though there could be no other. It waited there, this vast pale clay giant, magnificent and patient, waiting only for its river of bronze to come and make it eternal. Hold that image, and hold it kindly, and do not worry about it tonight. Tonight the horse of clay is standing in the sun, and men are marvelling, and the bronze has been promised, and everything is still possible. Set the rest down. We don't need it yet. And there was one more thing he made in these Milan years, small beside the giant horse, small enough to hold in your 2 hands, and yet in its quiet way it is one of the most astonishing things he ever did, and it will tell you, better than the war machines or the festivals, just how far ahead of every other painter alive his eye and his hand already ran. The Duke, you see, had a young mistress, a girl of perhaps 16, clever and lovely and well-read, named Cecilia Gallerani, and Leonardo was asked to paint her. And what he made was not a portrait like other portraits, stiff and facing forward and flat as a coin. He turned her. He caught her as though she had just heard a sound and was turning toward it, her body one way and her face another, alive with the very instant of motion, so that she seems about to speak, or to smile, or to rise and leave the frame. And in her arms he set a small white creature, an ermine, a slender winter white stoat, and she holds it, and her long fine fingers rest along its back, and the animal turns its head the same way she turns hers. So that woman and creature echo each other in one soft coiling gesture. We call it the Lady with an Ermine, and if ever you have seen it, even in a picture of a picture, you will remember that turning. No one painted like that. No one else in all of Italy caught the living turn of a body, the thought passing behind the eyes, the light lying soft along a cheek and a hand, the way Leonardo did in that little panel of a duke's young mistress. The other painters were still making likenesses. He was making a person, a mind, a breath, a moment that would never quite finish moving. And he did it not on the grand horse or the festival dome that everyone was watching, but almost in passing, on a small board, for a girl. That was the strangeness of him. Always the Colossus took years and vanished, the little turning lady endured. Hold that gently too. We will come to understand it, in time. So let this be where we rest tonight, in Milan, in the good years, with the lamp of that court burning bright and warm. There is gold in the workshop and music in the hall, and a giant horse of clay standing patient in the courtyard waiting for its bronze. There is a duke who wants to be magnificent, and a painter who can imagine anything. And for now, for this long golden while, the two of them fit together like a hand into a glove. Leonardo is prosperous. Leonardo is honoured. Leonardo is, for once, more or less where he belongs, doing 10 things at once and half of them wonders. The questions still crowd his mind about water, about wings, about the muscles of a horse and the light on a girl's turning cheek. But tonight the questions are happy ones, and there is time, and there is bronze that has been promised, and the future is still all promise, and no rain. Let your shoulders come all the way down. Let the plain of Lombardy lie wide and quiet under the evening. The horse is standing in the sun, the lady is turning, forever, towards some sound only she can hear. And the man who made them both is content, for now, in the warm bright court of Milan, with everything still ahead of him and nothing yet lost. Stay here a while, in the good years. There is no hurry at all. You may sleep, or you may follow him a little further. Either way the light of Milan will keep, and the story will wait, gently, for whenever you are ready. So let the lamp burn a little lower now, lower still, until it is only a small warm coin of light on the wall, and let us stay a while longer in Milan, in those good years, in the fullness of them, because there is a great quiet work waiting for us there, the kind of work a man gives years of his life to, slowly, the way a river gives itself to the sea, without hurry, without any sense that the hours are being spent. You need not hold anything tightly tonight. You may let your hands open on the blanket, let your shoulders come down away from your ears, let the whole weight of you sink an inch deeper into the bed, and know that the story will go on carrying itself forward, whether you follow every word or not. There is nothing here that can startle you. There is only a man in a plain room, and a wall, and the slow filling in of a supper that will outlast every wall it was ever painted upon. On the north side of Milan there stood, and there still stands, a church called Santa Maria degli Grazi, a handsome brick church, warm and rose-coloured in the afternoon light, with a refectory beside it, which is only a grand word for a dining hall, the long room where the friars of the convent took their meals together in silence, spooning up their soup, breaking their bread, day after ordinary day. And it was here, on one high-end wall of that quiet eating room, that Duke Ludovico asked Leonardo to paint the Last Supper of the Lord, the meal that Christ took with his 12 friends on the night before he was given up, so that the friars, looking up from their own plain suppers, might feel themselves to be sitting at that greater table too. It was a fitting thing to ask, and Leonardo, who by now had lived in Milan for years and had become the Duke's own artist and engineer and maker of marvels, took it up. But he did not take it up the way another painter would have. Here is the thing you must understand, gently, the small strange truth that sits at the very centre of this chapter, and you may hold it softly, the way you would hold a warm cup with both hands. In those days, a wall like that was painted in a method called fresco, which means fresh, and it worked like this. The plaster was laid on wet, only as much as could be painted in a single day, and the painter worked fast, right into the damp surface, so that as the plaster dried the colours dried into it and became part of the very stone, married to it forever. It was a beautiful method and a durable one, and it had only one hard rule, which was that you could not slow down. You could not stop and think. You could not scrape a face away in the evening because you had dreamed a better one in the night. Whatever you laid down in the wet plaster of the morning was yours to keep, and Leonardo, our Leonardo, the slow one, the dreamer, the man who could not bear to hurry and could not bear to leave a thing simple, looked at that hard rule and quietly, stubbornly set it aside. He would not race the drying plaster. He could not. It was not in him. He wanted to paint the way he thought, in long circling passes, coming back and back to a face, lightening a shadow here, deepening the hollow of an eye there, glazing one thin veil of colour over another until the whole thing glowed with that soft smokiness that was his and no one else's. And so he invented, or borrowed, or half-remembered, another way. He painted the great wall dry. He sealed the stone and worked upon it almost as if it were a wooden panel, in oils and temper of his own devising, so that he might take all the time in the world, so that he might leave it and return, and the wall would wait for him. And you already know, because you know this man by now, that this was both the making of the picture and in a way its slow undoing. For the paint he laid on the dry wall never truly bit into the stone the way fresco does, and it began, almost as soon as it was finished, to loosen, to bloom with damp, to lift and flake in tiny scales like a moth's wing. The most famous supper ever painted began to fade before the man who painted it had even grown old. Set that down gently, do not let it sadden you. There is a kind of rightness in it that we will come back to, and it asks nothing of you tonight but that you notice it and let it be. For picture how he worked, in the meantime, in those long Milanese days. The prior of the convent, the man in charge, grew impatient, as busy practical men will, because Leonardo would come to the refectory and climb his scaffold and stand there, brush in hand, and do nothing at all, only look, for an hour, for half a day, at the faces already begun, and then set one small stroke, and climb back down and walk away. And sometimes he would not come for days together. And the prior complained to the duke, who they say called Leonardo in to explain himself, and Leonardo answered, mildly, the way you might answer a child who does not understand that men of genius do the most work when they seem to be working least, because they are turning the thing over in their minds, arranging and inventing, before their hands ever move. Whether the words fell out exactly so scarcely matters, for they told the story, and it meant something true about him, that his labour was mostly invisible, mostly inside, a patient searching that no impatient man could ever see. And what he was searching for, above all, was two faces. He wanted the face of Christ at the centre of the table, calm in the very middle of sorrow, and he could not find it, and it is said he left that face the least finished of them all, unwilling to set down anything so small as a human face for a thing so far beyond him. And he wanted the face of Judas, the friend who would betray, and this he hunted for through the low streets of Milan, sketching hard men, cruel men, faces bent by greed, looking and looking for the one face that could hold so gentle and so terrible a thing. There is a legend, and you may take it as a legend, warm and probably untrue and pleasing all the same, that the impatient prior kept pressing him to finish, until Leonardo remarked dryly that if the prior wanted a face for Judas so very badly, why, he need only sit for it himself. It is the kind of thing men say the great man said. It made them laugh, and it made them love him, and so it has been passed down, hand to hand, all these long years to you, lying here in the dark. Now it was in these same Milan years, these full and golden years, that a new person came into Leonardo's life, and he came as trouble comes, wrapped in beauty. He was a boy of about 10 when he arrived, taken into the household as a servant and apprentice, curly-haired and lovely to look at, with the face of a small angel and, it turned out very quickly, the hands of a small thief. His name was Giacomo, but everyone soon called him Sulla, which was a nickname out of an old poem, and it means something like the little devil, or the imp, the little limb of Satan, and he earned it. Leonardo, who wrote everything down, kept in his notebook a wry, patient, almost tender ledger of the boy's misdeeds, the money stolen on the very first day, the silver-point pens that vanished, the coins slipped from a purse, and beside these entries again and again, in that mirror hand of his, he wrote the same 3 words, or words like them: thief, liar, obstinate, glutton, and yet. And yet he kept him. He kept him for the rest of his life, near 30 years, clothed him in fine rose-coloured coats and pink hose, forgave him, and forgave him again, and forgave him once more, the way you forgive the ones you love not because they have stopped disappointing you, but because the loving does not run out. There was in Leonardo, for all his solitude, a great warmth, a great tenderness for beauty and for the young, and Sala, maddening, light-fingered, laughing Sala, drank up as much of it as the master had to give. Hold that softly. It tells you something about the man that no painting can, that the same patient hands that could not finish a face could go on, year after year, patiently loving a boy who stole from him. And all this while, all through these years of the great slow wall and the beautiful thieving boy, the notebooks were coming into their full flower, and oh, this is the part to rest in. This is the wide, calm meadow of the chapter, so let yourself wander here. For Leonardo carried little books always, hung at his belt, and into them, in the small hours and the stolen hours, he poured everything, the whole flood of a mind that could not stop asking. He cut open the bodies of the dead in cold rooms by candlelight and drew the muscles of the arm. The branching of the veins, the chambers of the heart, drew them so truly that physicians would not catch up to him for hundreds of years. He watched water, always water, the way it curled around a post in the river, the way it spun into little turning eddies, the way it fell and braided and foamed. And he drew that too, patiently, as if water were a language he was slowly learning to read. He drew machines by the hundred, cog and screw and lever and gear, cranes and mills and diving suits and bridges, and things with great beating wings, for the dream of flight was already stirring in him, though we will come to that another night. He drew plants, the spiral set of leaves upon a stem, the opening of a flower. He drew the moon, and wondered, correctly, why it shone. He asked why the sky was blue, and why old men die gently, and how a bird holds itself upon the wind, and he did not always find the answer, and it did not seem to trouble him overmuch, because it was the asking he loved, the asking most of all. And out of all that watching, in these very years, came one small drawing, only a drawing, pen on paper, that the whole world would one day know by heart, though he made it almost as a note to himself. He had been reading an old Roman writer named Vitruvius, who had claimed that the body of a well-made man fits into the two perfect shapes, the circle and the square, and Leonardo took up his pen and made it so. He drew a man, arms spread, legs together, and then arms raised, legs apart, 4 arms and 4 legs it seems at first, a man caught in the middle of a gentle motion, and around him the square, and around him the circle, the man measured against the shapes of the heavens and the earth, the body set at the very centre of the world's order, as if to say, quietly, that we ourselves are made to the same measure as the stars. You have seen him, that spread man in his circle. He has been printed on coins and cards and the walls of 1,000 rooms. And he was born here, in a Milanese notebook, in the same years and by the same left hand that was searching, up on its scaffold, for the face of a sorrowing Christ. So this was the height of it, this was the fullest hour of the long day of his life, and I want you to hold him here a moment before we let the light change, hold the whole warm picture of it. A famous man in his 40s, honoured in a great city, servant to a duke who valued him, master of a workshop, keeper of a beautiful wayward boy, maker of the most talked of painting in Italy, and filling, night after night, book after book, with the secret marvels of a mind that seemed to have room for the whole of creation and to hurry over none of it. The supper was on the wall, the horse of clay still waited in its courtyard for the bronze that had not come. The notebooks were thickening. Cecilia's soft portrait hung in the world, and Milan lay all around him, prosperous and glittering and sure of itself, as cities are always sure of themselves in their good years, believing the good years will simply go on. They would not go on forever. Far off, over the mountains to the west, in the courts of France, wheels were beginning to turn that would one day roll down into this valley and change everything, and the flaking wall and the waiting horse and the safe warm court would all be caught up in it. But that is for another night, and it need not touch you now, not tonight, not at all. Tonight there is only the fullness, the good years at their ripest, the lamp warm, the man content at his work, the ink drying on another page of wonders. Let that be the last thing in your mind as you drift, the supper, unfinished and glowing, the boy forgiven again. The circle and the square and the man at the centre of them, quietly measuring the world he loved so much and understood so well and never, ever tired of. Let your breath go slow. Let the room go soft. You may sleep now if you like, and the good years of Milan will keep on shining, gentle and unhurried, until we meet them again. And so we come to the year the golden decade ended, though no one living inside it could have told you the exact hour it began to close. For these things rarely announce themselves. They arrive the way autumn arrives in the Tuscan hills, a coolness in the evening air, a shadow lying a little longer across the courtyard. And one morning you wake, and the season has already turned without asking your leave. Let the lamp burn low now, and let your breathing go slow and even, for this is a chapter of leaving and of wandering, and there is nothing in it that can trouble you, nothing that needs holding tight. We will simply walk beside a man as the walls of his good life come gently down around him, and we will watch how he carries himself when they do, which is, as you will see, the most quietly astonishing thing about him. The year is 1499. For nearly 17 years Leonardo had lived and worked in Milan under the roof of Ludovico Sforza, the duke they called Il Moro, the Moor, for his dark colouring and his darker cleverness, and in all that time the city had been for Leonardo a kind of second home, a place where his strangeness was not merely tolerated but prized, where a man could design a war machine in the morning and a wedding pageant in the afternoon, and a portrait of a woman holding a small white creature in the evening, and be paid and be praised and be left alone to wonder. But the world beyond the city walls had been shifting all the while, the way great slow rivers shift their beds without any single flood to blame. And now the young King of France, Louis XII, laid claim to Milan through an old thread of inheritance, and gathered an army and came down over the mountains. Picture it softly, from very high up, the way Leonardo himself liked to picture the world, the great cold spine of the Alps, and pouring down through its passes like water finding the low places, the columns of French soldiers. Their banners, their horses, their long guns, moving south into the warm plain of Lombardy. There was no stopping such a thing. Ludovico's rule, which had seemed as fixed as the cathedral, proved to be a thing made of alliances and money and fear. And when those gave way, it gave way all at once. The Duke fled north to beg help from the Emperor. The French walked into Milan almost as guests walk into a house whose door has been left open, and the long bright chapter of the Sforza court simply, quietly, stopped. Now here is the part I want to lay in your hands gently, because it is the saddest single thing in all of Leonardo's long life, and yet I do not want it to weigh on you, only to be understood and then set softly down. You remember the horse. All those years, the great bronze horse, the Sforza monument, the colossus meant to rear or stride above the city and carry Ludovico's father into eternity, the dream Leonardo had measured and modelled and studied until he understood the anatomy of a horse better than any man had ever troubled to. He had never cast it in bronze. The bronze had been needed for cannon in an earlier alarm, and the casting had been put off, as so many things in his life were put off, not from laziness, but from the endless refining of a mind that could always see one more question to answer first. And so what stood in the courtyard, what had stood there for years drawing crowds who came simply to marvel, was the horse in clay, the full giant model, 4 times the height of a man, the largest equestrian figure the world had yet seen, and it existed only in soft, unfired earth. When the French soldiers came, the Gascon crossbowmen among them found this enormous clay horse standing there, and they used it for target practice. They loosed their bolts into it, for sport, the way idle soldiers will, and then the rains came, the ordinary Lombard rains of autumn and winter, and the clay, which had never been fired hard, which had only ever been shaped and kept damp and tended, began to soften and to slump and to run. The largest dream of Leonardo's life, The thing he had poured a decade of looking into sank slowly back into the mud it had been raised from, and was gone. Hold that for just a moment, and then let it go, because Leonardo, in the end, had to do exactly that. There is no record of him raging. There is a line in his notebooks, from around these years so quiet it is easy to miss, a small private grieving over the horse, over the work undone, and then the notebooks go on. Because he went on. This is the pattern we have been watching all night, the finishing of almost nothing, but here you see its other face, its gentler face. The man who does not finish is also the man who is not destroyed when the unfinished thing is lost. He had never mistaken the horse for himself. He had loved the making of it, and the making could not be taken from him, for it had already happened, inside him, and no crossbow bolt could reach it there. So he gathered what he could gather, which was never very much, some clothes, some instruments, and above all the notebooks, always the notebooks, the thousands of pages in their backwards mirror hand that were the true treasure of his life, and he left Milan. He did not leave alone. Beside him went Sala, the beautiful, curly-headed young man who had come to him as a boy nearly 10 years before, the little devil who stole and lied and charmed, and was forgiven. Wherever Leonardo went now, this one went too, and would go for years yet, and let us not pretend to understand it entirely, only to note it with tenderness, that this most solitary of men kept close to him this one bright troublesome soul, and paid his debts, and bought him fine rose-coloured hose and stockings, and never sent him away. And beside them both went a third companion, and a happier one for the mind, Luca Pacioli, the mathematician, the Franciscan friar, who had written the great book on proportion, on the divine proportion, the golden ratio that seemed to whisper through the shapes of leaves and shells and the human body itself. Leonardo had drawn the illustrations for Pacioli's book, those clean, marvellous geometric solids, and the two men had become fast friends in Milan, talking numbers and forms far into the night. Now homeless together, they travelled together, the artist and the friar, and you may imagine, if it soothes you, their conversation on the road, the friar reasoning through his theorems, and Leonardo answering with the shape of a river or the bone of a wing, each teaching the other, each glad of the other, two curious old friends carried along by the times into places neither had planned to go. And where did the times carry them? First to Mantua, a small proud city on its ring of lakes, ruled by the Gonzaga family and shining just then with the presence of one of the most remarkable women of the age, Isabella d'Este, the Marchioness. A collector and a patron and a formidable intelligence, who wanted, more than almost anything, to have her portrait made by the famous fugitive who had arrived at her gates. Leonardo stayed only a little while. He was always leaving, you will have noticed by now, always a beginner and a passer-through, but before he left he took up his chalks, the black and the red and the touch of yellow, and he drew her. Not a finished painting, a cartoon, a full-size drawing on paper, her face turned to the side in pure calm profile, her body toward us, her expression grave and knowing and gentle all at once. It is one of the loveliest things his hand ever made, and it is of course unfinished, a promise of a painting that never came. For Isabella would write him letters for years afterward, patient and then less patient, coaxing and reminding, and Leonardo would answer, when he answered at all, with the soft evasions of a man who has already moved on to some other question. She never got her painting, she got the drawing, and the drawing was enough to make her immortal, though she wanted more, as people do. Let that be another small note in the long music of this life, how often what he left behind, half done, was worth more than what other men finished whole. From Mantua the road ran east and south to the water, to Venice, the impossible city built upon the sea, its streets made of canals, its palaces standing with their feet in the tide, a place unlike anywhere Leonardo had ever been, and you can feel, even at this distance, how his water-loving mind must have quickened at the sight of it, a whole civilization floating, a whole city that was in some sense a machine for living upon the water he had studied all his life. But Venice in that season was not at ease. The Turks, the great Ottoman power, were pressing at the edges of her territory, and the Venetians, practical men of trade and war, were less interested in the fugitive artist's portraits than in his other reputation, the one he had trumpeted years before in that famous letter to Ludovico, Leonardo the engineer, the deviser of defences and weapons. So they set him to it, and he gave them what he could: studies of how to defend the river approaches, sketches of movable barriers, and, most wonderfully, thoughts on how men might go beneath the water itself to attack an enemy's ships from below. A kind of diving apparatus, a way of breathing underwater, drawn out in his notebooks with the same calm attention he gave to a bird's wing or a smile. Whether any of it was built, whether any of it would have worked, scarcely matters for our purposes tonight. What matters is the picture of the man moving through crisis and answering it not with fear but with curiosity, turning even the threat of war into one more corner of the world to understand. And then, being Leonardo, he moved on again. For now his feet were turning, at last, toward home, toward Florence, the golden city on the Arno where he had been a boy at Verrocchio's bench, where he had first learned to grind pigment and cast bronze, and make an angel so alive the master was said to have laid down his brush. The city he had left almost 20 years before, as a restless young man, looking north for a bigger stage. He would come back to it a different creature altogether, no longer the promising youth but the most famous artist in Italy, spoken of everywhere, and yet a man without a patron, without a court, without a home, without a single great commission in hand, carrying his notebooks and his chalks and his beautiful thieving companion, and the memory of a horse dissolved in the rain, rich in fame and poor in almost everything fame is supposed to buy. It is a strange condition, and here I want you to rest in it a while, because it is the true resting place of this chapter, the still pool at the end of all this wandering. For think of what he had lost. 17 years of settled life, gone in a season, the greatest single work of his hands, the horse, gone into mud, the court that had loved him scattered, its duke a fugitive begging at a foreign door. A lesser man, an ordinary man, might have been broken by it, might have grown bitter, might have sat down by the road and cursed the French and the rain and his own slowness that had left the bronze uncast. But Leonardo, so far as any page or any witness tells us, did none of these things. He kept walking. He kept looking. On every stage of that long road, over the Alps' shadow, through Mantua, across the lagoon of Venice, along the dusty ways toward Tuscany, he kept his notebooks open. He watched how the water moved under the Venetian bridges, and how the birds banked over the marshes, and how the light fell on Isabella's grave, still face, and he wrote it all down, backwards, left-handed, in the small patient hand of a man who has understood something the rest of us spend our lives resisting, that the losing of things is not the end of wonder, that a man who has learned to love the questions more than the answers can never truly be made poor, because the world is endlessly full of new things to ask, and it costs nothing to ask them, and no army and no rain can take them away. He had stood once as a boy at the mouth of a great dark cave in the hills, afraid of the blackness and aching to know what lay inside, and he had chosen then to want to know. Set that down gently beside the man on the road now, older, greyer, homeless, famous, walking toward Florence with the mud of his lost horse still on his memory, and see that he is making, in his quiet way, the very same choice he made at the cave, the choice he will go on making every single day that is left to him, to turn his face not toward what he has lost in the dark behind him, but toward the marvel he has not yet seen up ahead. We need not decide tonight where that road leads him, or what he will find waiting in the old golden city, or whose face he will begin, quietly, without telling anyone it will matter, to paint. Set all of that softly aside, we do not need it yet. For now it is enough to hold the picture of a man at peace in the middle of his own undoing, walking easily through the Tuscan evening, glad of his friends, curious about the water and the birds, carrying everything that truly mattered to him in a bundle of backwards written pages under his arm. Let your shoulders come down. Let the lamp burn lower still. He is only walking home, and there is no hurry in him at all, and there need be none in you. You may drift off whenever you like, the road goes on without you, and so does he, unhurried, wandering, carried gently toward whatever comes next. And so, in these wandering years, the road carries him at last back toward the golden city that first made him, back toward Florence and the slow brown river he had drawn as a boy, and you may let him travel there gently, without hurry, the dust of many miles on his cloak and the notebooks bundled safe among his things. Let the lamp burn low now, and let your shoulders come down, for there is no danger in this part of the story either, only a man growing older and still, always still, wanting to know. He is close to 50 when he comes home, no longer the dazzling young master who once painted an angel too alive to bear, but a famous man now, a man whose name is spoken in every court, and yet a man without a great patron, without a wall of his own to fill, a little adrift, the way you sometimes feel adrift in the quiet before sleep, and no worse than that. Let him be adrift softly. The city takes him back the way an old house takes back a returning child, and for a while he simply looks, and measures, and waits to see what the world will ask of him next. And what the world asks of him next is a strange thing, and I will tell it to you softly, because although the man he goes to serve was a hard man, a frightening man, the story reaches you here only as an old tale, worn smooth, unable to touch you. For there rides through Italy in these years a young warlord named Cesare Borgia, the son of a pope, beautiful and ruthless and swift, carving himself a kingdom out of the small towns of the Romagna, that green and hilly country to the east. And this Cesare Borgia, who wants the cleverest men of his age about him, sends for Leonardo, and Leonardo, who has always wanted to see how the world is built, who has drawn fortresses and canals and engines of war in his notebooks for the pure joy of understanding them, agrees to go, and becomes for one strange season the warlord's military engineer, his surveyor of walls, his maker of maps. You need not be troubled by the warlord's cruelty. Hold that away, we do not need it here. Keep only the picture of the gentle grey bearded man riding through the autumn hills of the Romagna, past castles and river fords, his eye moving over everything, measuring the slope of a valley, the turn of a wall, the depth of a moat, and setting it all down. For here is the wonder of that season, the thing that survives when the warlord and his ambitions have long crumbled into dust. Leonardo, riding those towns, made maps. And the maps he made were unlike any maps that had been made before him, for other men in that age drew a city the way a child draws a city, from the side, little towers and roofs all in a pretty row, more picture than plan. But Leonardo drew the town of Imola as though he were a bird hung high in the still air above it, looking straight down, every street in its true place, every wall and tower and open square set exactly where it stood, the whole town caught inside a great faint circle of directions like the face of a compass. He drew a map so true, so cool, so far ahead of its time, that when people look at it now, 500 years on, they say it looks like a photograph taken from an aeroplane, though no aeroplane would rise for 4 more centuries, and no photograph existed at all. He had lifted himself into the sky with nothing but his mind and his patient hand. Let that settle in you gently as you lie there in the dark, a man who could not fly, who longed all his life to fly, teaching himself to see the earth as the birds see it, simply by wanting to, simply by looking hard enough. Hold that softly. It is one of the loveliest things he ever did, and he did it in the service of a war, and the war is forgotten. And the map remains. And it is in the warlord's camp, in those same cold and watchful months, that he meets another quiet man, a lean Florentine official with a thin, clever, half-smiling face, a man sent to keep an eye on Borgia and report home what he saw. His name is Niccol Machiavelli, and he too is a watcher, a man who studies power the way Leonardo studies water, patiently, without flinching, to learn its true nature. And these two watchers, the painter and the secretary fall into talk, into a friendship of long conversations by the fire, two of the most remarkable minds Italy ever produced sitting together in a warlord's camp in the hills, and no one wrote down a word of what they said. You may imagine it however you like, drifting there, it scarcely matters what the words were. What matters is the picture of them. Two quiet men leaning toward the same small flame, understanding each other, and it is a warm picture, and you may keep it by you as the fire burns down. But Leonardo is not a man of camps and sieges, not truly, and the strange season passes as all his seasons pass, and by the following year he has come away from the warlord unharmed, his notebooks fuller, his mind fed, and he settles again in Florence, in the city that is arguing with itself about art the way it always does. And here the city offers him something enormous, the kind of commission a man builds his whole fame upon. A vast wall in the great council hall, the very heart of the city's government, to be covered with a painting of a famous Florentine victory, the Battle of Anghiari, a battle scene, all horses and banners and struggling men, painted huge across the wall of the room where the city makes its laws. It is a great honour and a great chance, and Leonardo takes it, and begins, as he begins all things, by thinking, by drawing, by filling page after page with the fury of horses, the twist of a rider's body, the terrible knot of men and beasts fighting for a single flag. For even a battle to Leonardo is first of all a question about motion, about muscle and force, and the way rage moves through a body, and he studies it the way he studies everything, tenderly, as a puzzle set before him by the world. And now comes the part that people have told and retold for 500 years, and I will tell it to you gently, because it is a marvel and not a quarrel, whatever it may have felt like at the time. For the city, in its wisdom or its mischief, gives the wall on the opposite side of that same great hall to another artist, a young man, fierce and burning, and not yet 30, a sculptor of astonishing power named Michelangelo Buonarroti. And so, in one room, the two greatest artists Italy would ever know are set to paint facing walls, at the very same time, each with his cartoons and his scaffolds, the whole city watching to see whose battle would be the greater. The gentle old dreamer, near 50, grey and courtly, and slow, forever wandering off into water and birds and anatomy, and the young man, hard as the marble he loved, impatient, solitary, jealous of his own gift. They were not alike, these two, and they did not warm to each other, and you may set the sharpness of that aside. We do not need it, and keep only the extraordinary picture of it, two immortal walls being born in one room, the beginning of art's greatest rivalry, and neither of those paintings surviving to this day. Both would slip away, in the end, as so much of Leonardo's life slips away, into legend and lost cartoons and copies made by other hands. Hold that softly, and do not mind that it is sad. There is a sweetness folded inside it that we will come to. And here I must slow and speak very quietly, because in these very same crowded years, while the warlord rides and the great hall waits and the young rival sharpens his chisels, Leonardo begins a small thing, a private thing, a little panel no larger than the span of your two hands, that will one day outshine every battle wall in the world. A merchant of Florence, a comfortable ordinary man in the silken cloth trade, asks him to paint a portrait of his wife, a young Florentine woman named Lisa Gerardini, the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. Just a portrait of a merchant's wife, one commission among many, the sort of thing a busy master might finish in a season and hand over and forget. But Leonardo does not finish it, and does not hand it over, and does not forget it. He sits her down, this quiet young woman, and he begins to paint her face, and her folded hands, and the faint uncertain beginning of a smile at the corner of her mouth, and something in that smile catches him, and will not let him go. You do not need to hold the whole of that painting tonight. Set it down gently. We will come back to it, and it will grow into one of the great wonders of this whole long life. Only notice as you drift the smallness of its beginning, a village boy grown old, in a borrowed workshop, in a season of war and rivalry, quietly starting a little portrait he will carry with him, unfinished and beloved, until the very last day of his life. Set that down softly. It is waiting for us, further on. But the Great Wall, the Battle of Anghiari, the public triumph the whole city expected of him, that story I can tell you to its end here, and it ends the way so many of his stories end, gently and without triumph, and with a strange grace. For Leonardo, being the man who could never simply do a thing the ordinary way, did not wish to paint his battle in the plain, patient method of fresco, painting quickly onto wet plaster before it dried, the way the old masters did, the way that lasts. That was too fast for him, too final, allowing no changing of the mind, no slow deepening of a shadow over many days, and Leonardo could not bear to hurry, and could not bear a thing that could not be perfected. And so, just as he had done with his Last Supper on that far wall in Milan, he experimented. He mixed his colours in his own way, he tried a method he had read of from the ancient world, painting with waxes and oils that he could work slowly, that he could return to again and again, and he set to work on the Great Wall, and the horses and the men and the fury of the fight began to appear under his hand, magnificent, alive, the finest thing that room had ever seen. And then, softly, quietly, the painting began to fail. For the new method did not hold. Some say he brought braziers of fire close to the wall to dry the colours faster, and the heat took the upper part unevenly, so that the paint above stayed wet while the paint below began to run. And the colours, the beautiful labouring colours, began to slide down the wall, the great horses melting, the banners weeping downward, the whole grand battle sinking slowly toward the floor, and there was nothing to be done, no way to hold it, no way to fix what the method itself had spoiled. His masterpiece, his answer to the young rival, the painting the whole city had gathered to see, dissolving before his eyes, exactly as the Last Supper had begun to flake and fade on its far Milanese wall. Twice now the same gentle sorrow, twice the reach for something too perfect, too new, too much his own, and twice the thing itself refusing to stay. And here is the part I most want to leave with you tonight, the part to carry down into sleep, for it is the true heart of the man. He did not rage. He did not, so far as anyone tells us, break the brushes or curse the wall or fall into despair. He looked at the running colours, this man who had lost a clay horse to the rain and a supper to the damp, and now a battle to the fire, and he let it go. He simply, quietly, let it go. Perhaps he had already, in his heart, moved on to the next question, the flight of a bird, the valve of a heart, the turning of water, the smile of a merchant's wife. Perhaps he had learned long ago in some deep and gentle place that the finishing was never quite the point, that the wonder was in the making and the seeing and the trying, and that a thing half done, a thing dissolved, a thing carried off by fire or rain, was still a thing he had truly looked at and truly loved, and that no running of the colours could take that looking away. He gathered his notebooks, and he turned toward the next mystery, the way a river turns around a stone, without anger, without stopping, only going on. So let the great hall grow dim now, the scaffolds empty, the running battle left to fade in peace upon its wall, and let the old master walk out into the Florentine evening with his mind already full of birds and water and a smile he cannot yet explain. You need hold none of it tightly. Let the maps drawn from the sky, and the two watchers by the warlord's fire, and the two immortal walls facing each other in one room, and the little portrait just begun, all settle softly into the dark like leaves coming to rest on the surface of a slow stream. There is no loss here that can reach you, only a gentle man who kept on going, and who is going still, further into wonder, and we will follow him there when we are ready, in a little while, in no hurry at all. Rest now. The story goes on without you, and holds your place, and waits. So let us do something gentle now, something slow. Let us leave the maps and the council walls and the great commissions behind for a little while, and simply wander. The way you might wander through a quiet gallery late in the evening when the crowds have all gone home and only one lamp is lit in each far corner. We have followed his life along its road, from Vinci to Florence to Milan and back again. From patron to patron, from one failed wall to another, and that road goes on, it will go on to France in the end. But a man is not only his road, a man is also the country inside him, the wide and unmapped country of his own attention, and Leonardo's inner country was the strangest and most spacious that any person has ever carried behind a single quiet face. So let the road wait. Let the lamp burn low. Tonight we drift through his mind instead, room by room, and you may drift with me as far as you like. And if you fall asleep somewhere among these rooms, that is exactly right, for they are rooms made for dreaming in. Come first to the room of the birds. All his life, from the boy in the hills who lay on his back in the grass watching the hawks hang motionless on the wind, to the old man in France still turning the pages, Leonardo loved the flight of birds more than almost anything in the world, and he could not let it alone. He filled page after page with them. He drew the wing opening and closing, the long feathers spreading like fingers and folding again, the way a bird tips itself to catch the air, the way it spills the air to fall, the way it hangs, the way it turns. He watched them the way other men watched money, patiently, greedily, wanting to know the secret of the thing, and the secret he wanted was this: the oldest wish there is, older than any city or any king, he wanted to fly. Not as a dream, not as a wish upon a star, but as a problem, an engineering problem, a thing that might be solved with the right measurements and the right frame of wood and cloth. If a bird can hold itself up on the air, he reasoned, then the air is a thing that can be leaned upon. And if it can be leaned upon, then a man who understood the leaning might lean upon it too. Hold that softly. It is a beautiful thought, and it was centuries ahead of him, and it never quite let him rest. So he designed wings. He designed a great deal, in fact, in that room of his mind, machines with beating wings that a man would work with his arms and his legs and the whole strength of his back, harnesses of leather, frames of light wood and waxed linen, and one machine that turned like a screw in the air, a spiralling thing meant to bore itself up into the sky, which people have looked at ever since, and thought of the helicopters that would come 400 years later. He drew a soft canopy, a pyramid of cloth, a man to hang beneath it, and float down gently instead of falling, and that too the world would build one day and call a parachute, long after he was gone. He did not build most of these. He could not. The materials were not there, the engines were not there, the whole understanding of the moving air was not there, it could not be there yet, the world was simply too young. But he drew them the way you might write letters to a future you will never meet, and the future opened those letters at last, and wept a little, to find how far ahead he had been standing. And there is a legend about the wings, the way there is a legend about so many things with him, and you know by now how we hold a legend, lightly, in an open hand, not gripping it to ask whether every word is true, only turning it in the lamplight to see what it meant to the people who told it. They said that on a hill near Florence called Monte Cesari, which means the mountain of the swans, Leonardo carried one of his flying machines to the top, and that a man went out from the edge on those great cloth wings, out over the drop and the tops of the trees, and that for a moment, one held breath of a moment. He was up, he was flying, before the air let him down again. Whether it happened or not scarcely matters. Perhaps it was only ever a hope written on the mountain of the swans, a hope that the mountain kept. But they told it, and they told it because it felt true of him, because if any man of that age was going to walk to the edge of a cliff with wings on his back and lean out over the empty air trusting his own drawings to hold him, it was going to be this one, the boy who chose desire over fear at the mouth of the cave and went on choosing it every single day of his life. Set that beside him. We will need it later. For now let it hang there on the wind the way the hawks hang, going nowhere and everywhere at once. Now come quietly into a darker room, and do not be afraid. There is nothing here to hurt you. There is only a candle and a table and an old man's patient hands. This is the room of the body, and it is one of the strangest and most tender rooms in all his mind. For Leonardo, who wanted to understand everything, understood that a man is a machine too, in his way. A machine of muscle and cord and channel and pump, and he wanted to know how it was made, from the inside, the way he wanted to know how the wing was made, or the river or the seed. And so, in the cold quiet of hospital mortuaries, by candlelight with a knife and a bowl and a stack of paper, he opened the dead, gently, to learn how the living were put together. It sounds hard, said flatly like that in the dark, and so let us not say it flatly. Let us say it the way he seems to have felt it, which was not with horror but with reverence, with the plain wonder of a man lifting the back off a beautiful clock to see at last how the hours are kept. There was an old man, he tells us, whom he had spoken with in the hospital in Florence, an old man who said he was 100 years old and who felt nothing wrong with him at all, only a growing weakness, and who then, sitting quietly in his bed, with no struggle and no pain, simply slipped away, as softly as a candle gutters when the wax is spent. And Leonardo, who had liked him, opened him afterward, wanting to know, gently wanting to know, why so sweet and easy a death had come to him. And he found the answer written in the man's own heart, in the narrowed and hardened vessels that carried the blood, cold and dry where once they had run warm. And he understood that the old man had not been struck down, only slowly and mercifully starved of the warm current of his own life, until the light went out on its own. He drew the heart. He drew its chambers and its valves and the swirl of the blood turning inside it, and he understood things about the way that swirl worked that no one would confirm for hundreds of years, and he wrote it all down in his backward hand and set it aside. Hold how tender that is. He cut into death not to conquer it, but to understand a peaceful death, so that he might learn how a man could be let go so gently. That was the shape of his curiosity. Always. It was a kind of love. And in that same candlelit room, on those same quiet pages, he drew the very beginning of a life, the child curled sleeping in the womb, knees drawn up, small and perfect and folded into itself, waiting. No one had ever drawn it so truly, so tenderly. The whole soft mystery of it set down in ink. He drew the bones and the muscles beneath the skin, layer by patient layer, the arm and the shoulder, the spine, the small machinery of the hand, his own restless hand drawing the hand that drew it. Hundreds of pages. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of the human body, more careful and more true than anything the world had, so far ahead of the doctors of his own time that had they been printed and shared they might have moved medicine forward by lifetimes. But they were not printed. They went into the notebooks, the great tide of the notebooks, with everything else, and they slept there in his backward writing for centuries, waiting, the way the child in the drawing waits, to be born into a world at last ready to see them. Do not let that sadden you. Let it only fill you with the quiet sighs of the thing. Somewhere in the dark of the 16th century a man was drawing the truth of us all, alone, by one small flame, for no reward and no fame, for nothing at all but the wanting to know. That is a warm thought to hold. Hold it while your shoulders come down. Now let us leave the body and step into a room full of moving water, for water was perhaps the deepest of all his loves, the first thing the boy in the hills ever truly studied, and the last thing the old man in France ever drew. He could not stop watching water. He watched how it curled around a stone in a stream, how it braided and unbraided itself, how it fell and threw up bubbles and drew them down again in spirals, how it dug at a bank and laid down a bar of sand, how a current met a current and turned. He saw that the water turned in the same curling, spiralling way that the air turned, and that the blood turned inside the heart, and that a woman's hair fell in the same coiling ringlets, and he drew them all with the same line, because he had seen, quietly, alone, that the world repeats its patterns, that the same shape runs through the river and the wind and the heart and the hair, that everything flowing flows alike. That is a thing scientists would take centuries more to say plainly, and he saw it in a stream as a boy and drew it as an old man, over and over, the eternal turning of the water. And at the very end of his life, in a room at the back of this part of his mind, the water studies turned into something stranger and more overwhelming. The drawings people call the deluges. Great storms of water and wind, whole worlds dissolving into swirling ruin, mountains breaking apart, the sky and the sea churning together into one turning chaos, drawn with a terrible tender beauty. Page after page of the end of all things, rendered as a kind of vast calm music. And no one is quite sure why an old man, safe and honoured, sat drawing the drowning of the world. Perhaps it was fear, softened into wonder. Perhaps it was only the final flowering of his lifelong love of the turning water, the current followed all the way to the edge. We do not need to decide tonight. Set it down softly. It is only another room, and we are only passing through, and none of that water can reach you where you are lying, warm and dry and drifting in the dark. And now, at the very centre of all these rooms, in the quietest room of all, the one he never showed to anyone, there is a small painting on a poplar board resting on an easel, and there is a woman in it, and she is smiling. Come and stand in front of her a moment. You have seen her. Everyone has seen her. She may be the most looked-at face in the whole history of the world, and yet here, in the beginning, she was only a small private portrait of a Florentine merchant's wife, a young woman named Lisa, begun in an ordinary way for an ordinary reason, and then never, ever finished. Never handed over, never let go. He kept her, through all the moves and all the patrons and all the years to come, from Florence to Milan to Rome to France. He carried this one small painting with him, and he touched it and touched it again, laying on the thinnest films of colour, softer than breath, one over another, blurring every hard edge into shadow so gently that you cannot find the line where her cheek ends and the air begins. That softening was his own great secret, his smoke, and he built her whole face out of it, and above all he built the smile. The smile. Hold it lightly, the way he seems to have wanted it held. It is there, and it is not there. Look at her mouth and it fades, look at her eyes, and it gathers again at the corner of your sight, as though she has just this moment thought of something, and has not yet decided whether to tell you. As though she is more alive than the paint has any right to be, forever on the very edge of speaking. He never solved her. That is the wonder of it. The man who wanted the answer to everything, who cut open the heart to learn how a man dies gently, and lay in the grass to learn how a bird holds the wind, made at the centre of his life one small human face that has no answer at all, only that soft, endless, unfinished smile, and he could not stop working at it, and he could not bear to give it away, and he never did. She was with him at the end, but that is later, and the road for that is still ahead, and we do not need it yet. So let her smile there in the lamplight, half turned toward you, warm and unhurried, and let all these rooms stand quiet around her, the wings folded on their pages, the old man's peaceful heart, the sleeping child, the turning water. This was the true country of his life, wider than any duchy, deeper than any patron's purse, and he wandered it every day with the same soft wonder you might feel wandering it now, drifting from room to room with your eyes growing heavy. You need not remember any of it. It goes on without you, all of it, the birds and the water and the smile, going on turning gently in the dark. Let your breath go slow. Let the smallest of these rooms be the one you rest in. The story keeps, and we will find the road again when you are ready, and there is no hurry in the world. And so the little portrait travels on with him, wrapped and cushioned somewhere among his things, the smiling woman he will not let go of, and we may leave her there for now, safe in the dark of a travelling chest. And follow the road north again, back over the old familiar ground toward Milan, for that is where he goes, in these years past his 50th birthday, when most men of his age were settling by a fire and letting the young world run on without them. Leonardo does not settle. He goes back to Milan, the city that had once been his golden home, though it is a changed Milan now, a Milan under new masters, and he goes back into it the way a man returns to a house he once loved and finds the furniture rearranged, familiar and strange all at once. Let that be the shape of this chapter, and hold it softly, a great man returning to old rooms that have been given to other people. There is a gentle ache in that, but nothing sharp, nothing that can wake you, only the quiet sadness of a life that has lasted long enough to see its own morning become someone else's afternoon. The French were in Milan now, you remember, and where once Duke Ludovico had ruled, there ruled the men of France, and among them was a governor named Charles d'Amboise, a courteous, admiring man who wanted nothing so much as to have the famous Leonardo near him. And behind Charles stood the King of France himself, Louis XII, who had seen the Last Supper on the wall of Santa Maria del Grassi when his armies first took the city, and had been so struck by it, they say, that he asked his engineers whether the whole wall might be cut out and carried back to France, that he might keep the painting for his own. Think of that for a moment, gently, the way you might turn a smooth stone in your hand, a king so moved by a picture of men at supper that he wished to lift a wall off its foundations and ferry it across the mountains. They could not do it. Of course, a wall is a wall, and the paint was already loosening, and the thing would have crumbled to powder on the road. But the wish was real, and it tells you how the name of Leonardo still shone, even in these later, quieter years. Whatever the world was becoming, it had not forgotten who he was. So the French welcomed him, and paid him, and set him little tasks that pleased him and troubled no one. Plans for a country villa with gardens and fountains and a stream made to run wherever he wished it. Water again, always water, the old love of his boyhood following him into old age. He drew canals for the Lombard plain and studied how rivers might be tamed and turned. He went on filling his notebooks in the mirror hand, page after page, as he had done all his life, for that at least never left him. The hand that wrote backward wrote on to the very end, and the court was kind, and the pay was steady, and there is a softness to this second Milan, a mellow, autumn-coloured softness, like the light in a room at the close of a long afternoon when no one has yet risen to light the lamps. Let your shoulders come down into that light. Nothing here will hurry you. And it is here, in this second Milan, that a young man comes into the story who will matter more, in the end, than almost any patron or prince. A boy of good family, gentle and handsome and well-mannered, from the small nobility of the Milanese countryside, named Francesco Melzi. He is perhaps 14 or 15 when he comes to Leonardo, about the age Leonardo himself had been when his father first carried his drawings to Verrocchio's door, and there is something fitting in that, something that closes a circle, though no one at the time would have said so. Melzi is not like Sala. You remember Sala, the beautiful thieving one, the little devil, who is still there too, still about, still being forgiven. But Sala was a creature of appetite and mischief, loved for what he was rather than for anything he did. Melzi is different. Melzi is steady. Melzi is the kind of young man who reads and writes a fair, clear hand, and listens and remembers, and can be trusted with things that matter. He becomes a pupil, and then more than a pupil he becomes a companion, and then more than a companion. He becomes, as the years go on, something very like the son that Leonardo, who had no children of his own, had never had. The son of his old age, we might call him, and the phrase is a tender one, so hold it gently. In all the wandering that is still to come, through Rome and over the Alps and into France and to the very end, Melzi will be at his side, devoted, patient, loving, and it is Melzi, in the end, who will gather up the thousands upon thousands of notebook pages and carry them home and guard them like a sacred trust. But that is far ahead. For now he is only a bright boy at the edge of the workshop, learning to grind colours and hold a pen, watching the old master the way the old master had once watched the water and the birds. Set that down softly beside the smiling portrait in the chest. Both of them are travelling with him now. But Milan, even a kind Milan, cannot hold him forever, for the world is restless in these years, kings and popes forever shifting the board, and by the road turns south toward Rome. It is around the year 1513 that Leonardo goes down to Rome, an old man of 60 and more, drawn by a new patron, Giuliano de' Medici, brother of the new pope, a man of the great Florentine family whose grandfather Lorenzo the Magnificent had ruled Florence in the far-off golden days of Leonardo's own youth. So there is a kind of homecoming in it, a returning to the orbit of the Medici, the family that had shone over his beginnings now shining, a little over his age. Giuliano gives him rooms in the Vatican, in the part called the Belvedere, a fine airy set of rooms up on the hill with the gardens below, and a pension and freedom to work at whatever he likes. And you might reasonably think, that this would be the crown of it all, the great mind honoured at last in the greatest city of the Christian world, in the very household of the Pope, and in a small way it is. But Rome in these years is not really Leonardo's city. Rome in these years belongs to the young. For this is the Rome where Michelangelo has just come down from the scaffolding of the Sistine Chapel, having covered its ceiling with a whole heaven of figures, a labour of years that has left him bent and half-blind and famous beyond all measure. The fierce younger man, you remember, who had stood at the opposite wall in Florence, and who has never had much warmth for the gentle old dreamer from Vinci. And this is the Rome where Raphael, younger still, younger than either of them, sweet-natured and quick and beloved, is painting the Pope's own rooms with a grace that makes the whole city sigh. And Raphael at least loves Leonardo, has studied him, has borrowed the soft-turned smiles and the pyramids of gathered figures and the tender shadowed faces, has learnt from him the way a son learns from a father he admires from across a room. But even that admiration has a sting in it, if you let it, for it is the admiration the future gives the past, grateful, respectful, and already moving on. The world is looking at these young men now. The world is talking about the ceiling and the papal rooms, and Leonardo, up in his airy Belvedere with his gardens and his pension, is a little apart from all of it, a great name that everyone honours and no one quite knows what to do with. Hold that lightly, for it need not weigh on you. It is only the oldest and softest of sorrows, the one that comes to everyone who lives long enough, the sorrow of watching the parade go by from a bench you have earned but no longer wish to leave. And Rome, for all its splendour, is not always gentle with him. He is a strange old man to them, you see, with his mirror writing and his endless curious tinkering. He amuses himself in these years with mirrors and lenses and the bending of light grinding glass, studying how a curved surface gathers the sun, dreaming of great burning mirrors. But his German assistants, the metal workers set to help him, do not understand him and quarrel with him, and grumble and carry tales, until the tinkering that should have been a delight becomes a vexation. And there is worse, in its small, quiet way. For all his life Leonardo has hungered to understand the body from the inside, to open the flesh and read how the living machine is made, and in Rome he goes on with his dissections, in the hospital of the Holy Spirit, by candlelight, among the bodies of the poor and the dead. But now the whispers begin. Someone carries word to the Pope that the old man from Milan is cutting up corpses in the night, and it is spoken of as something dark, something unholy, something not to be allowed, and the hospital doors are closed to him. Think how that must have felt, though feel it gently, from a warm, safe distance, the man who wanted only to know, to see how the heart branches and how the child lies curled before its birth, turned away as though his wonder were a wickedness. He does not rage. That was never his way. He folds the drawings into his notebooks with all the others and lets it go, the way he had let so much go, the horse and the mural and the years, but there is a loneliness in it now that had not been there before, a sense of a man whose gifts have outrun the understanding of those around him, and who is just beginning to feel it. And there is the body itself, aging as bodies do. It is somewhere in these Roman years, or near them, that the right hand— no, not the drawing hand, mind you, for Leonardo drew and wrote with the left, always the left. That was the whole marvel of him. But the right hand, the other hand, begins to fail him, to stiffen and curl, perhaps the first faint shadow of the stroke that is still years off. He is growing old. The beard is long and white now, or nearly so, the beard of the famous old sage, the face that men would remember and draw and copy long after, the face of wisdom itself. And behind that grave and beautiful old face there is still, unchanged, the boy at the mouth of the cave, still wanting to know what lies inside the dark, still bending toward the mystery, but the world around him is hurrying now, faster than he can go, full of young men and new marvels, and it has, ever so slightly, stopped waiting for him. So let us leave him there a while, in Rome, in the Belvedere, an old man among his mirrors and his shut-away drawings, honoured and idle and a little forgotten. The most learned man alive sitting quietly to one side while the great show of the age goes on without him. It is not a bitter picture. He has Melcy beside him, faithful and young and fond, and Sala somewhere near, and his notebooks, and the smiling portrait still with him, still unfinished, still travelling. He has his own inexhaustible mind, which no closed door and no whispering assistant could ever shut. But he has, for the first time, the feeling of a man for whom the world has grown a little too fast, a little too crowded, a little too full of others' triumphs. And a lesser story might end an old man there, in the shade, forgotten, and call it a fitting close. But it is not the close. For far away, across the mountains, in the green valley of a river called the Loire, there is a young king, newly come to his throne, dazzled by everything Italian, and by nothing so much as the legend of the old master in Rome. And in his young head a thought is forming, a generous, extraordinary thought, that will one day soon become an invitation, carried by messengers over the Alps to the airy rooms of the Belvedere. It has not arrived yet. It is only gathering, somewhere out beyond the edge of these tired Roman days, like a light not yet seen over a far hill. But it is coming. And so, though the old man may feel the world hurrying past him, and may sit a little sadly among his mirrors as the young men rise, the truth is that his very last and gentlest home has not been given up on him at all. It is being made ready, far off, by a boy king who thinks him the wisest man who ever lived. Hold that quietly, and let it comfort you as you drift. The story is not done with him. The kindest chapter is still to come. And even now, while he sits forgotten in Rome, someone is preparing to honour him at last. Let the lamp burn lower still. You may sleep now if you like. The road to France is being opened while he rests, and it will still be there, waiting, when the morning comes. And so the invitation came, the way the best things in his life so often had, quietly, from the north, from someone young enough to be dazzled by him rather than tired of him. It was the year 1516, and Leonardo was 64 now, an old man by the measure of his age, and the young King of France, Francis, only just past 20 and newly crowned, had heard all his life the legend of the Florentine who could do anything, the man who painted the smile no other man could paint, who drew the inside of the body and the flow of rivers and the machines of some far-off century, and the young king wanted him. Not to build a wall, not to cast a horse, not to design a fortress or a festival or a canal, but simply to have him near, to sit with him, to listen to him talk, to keep him the way you might keep a rare and gentle animal you loved, or an old teacher whose company was reward enough. Let your shoulders come down as you hear that. After all the patrons who wanted a thing from him, after the dukes and the warlords and the councils who wanted the battle painted and the monument raised and the machine that would fly, here at last was a great lord who wanted nothing from him but himself. Hold that softly. It is a good thing to arrive at, near the end of a long road. So he made the last of his journeys, the long, slow crossing of the Alps. The mountains he had drawn so often from below, the folded stone and the far blue snow, and this time he went over them and down the other side, down into France, into the green valley of the Loire, a soft country of slow rivers and pale stone and gentle weather, so unlike the burnt gold of Tuscany, and yet, in its own quiet way, just as beautiful. And he did not come empty-handed. In his baggage, wrapped and carried carefully across those mountains, came the panels he could not part with, the paintings he had carried for years and could never quite deliver, and among them, of course, was her, the merchant's wife with the smile, the Mona Lisa, the little portrait he had begun so many years before in Florence and had never stopped touching, never sold, never let go. She crossed the Alps with him. Think of that, in the dark, as you lie there. That famous face, that most looked at face in all the world, made its way over the mountains into France in the luggage of a tired old man who simply could not bear to leave her behind, because she was not finished, because nothing he truly loved was ever finished, because to finish her would have been to admit there was nothing more to see, and he never once in 64 years believed that there was nothing more to see. They gave him a house to live in, a lovely manor of rose-coloured brick and pale stone called Clou, which the years would come to call Clos Luc, close by the king's own great stowe at Amboise, so close that, the story goes, a covered passage or a short walk under the trees connected the two, and the young king could come whenever he liked to sit with the old master. And there, in that gentle house, in the last rooms he would ever live in, Leonardo settled into the strangest and softest chapter of his whole long life. There was no great work demanded of him. There was no wall waiting, no deadline, no duke tapping his foot. There was a garden, and there were windows looking out on the French light, and there was a fire, and there were his notebooks, the thousands of pages, the whole life of his looking, stacked and bound and piled around him. And there was Melcy. Set everything else down for a moment, and keep only that. Francesco Melcy, the gentle young Milanese nobleman who had come to him years before and become the son of his old age, was there, at his side through all of it, ordering the papers, writing the letters, reading to him, caring for him with a tenderness that asks nothing and expects nothing, the way you care for someone you love simply because you love them. Sala was there too for a while, the beautiful thieving boy grown now into a man, though he would drift back toward Italy before the end, taking some of the paintings, staying in the will, forgiven to the last as he had always been forgiven. But it was Melcy who stayed. It was Melcy who was there. And the king came. This is one of the sweetest things in the whole story, and you may let it carry you halfway to sleep. This bright young monarch, who had all of France to rule and every pleasure in the world to chase, would come and sit at the feet of the old man and simply listen, hour after hour, to Leonardo talk about painting and about water, about the flight of birds and the machinery of the heart, about how a smile forms and how a shadow softens into light, about all the 10,000 things the old man had spent his life watching. And Francis said of him a thing that has come down to us across 500 years, that he could not believe there had ever been another man born into the world who knew as much as Leonardo, that no man ever born had known so much. Imagine hearing that, near the end. Imagine a life that began with a village boy nobody expected anything of, a child who could not become a notary because of the circumstances of his birth, a boy who wandered the hills half wild and taught himself by looking, and imagine that same life arriving here, in a warm French house, with a king at his knee saying no man ever born knew as much as you. He was not honoured at the last for what he had finished. He had finished so little. He was honoured at the last simply for what he was, for the mind, for the looking, for the wonder itself. Hold that gently against your chest. It is the answer beginning to arrive. The body, of course, was failing, the way bodies do, and there is nothing frightening in it, nothing that can reach you where you lie. His right hand, the one that had held pens and brushes and styluses for more than half a century, though it was the left that did the fine work and the mirror writing, had begun to stiffen and to fail, and a stroke, sometime in these last years, left that side of him weak, so that a visitor who came to see him found that he could no longer paint as he once had, could no longer make the panels come alive under his fingers. But mark this, because it matters, because it is the whole man in a single quiet fact. He could not paint any more, but he did not stop. He went on drawing. He went on teaching Melcy. He went on thinking and planning and ordering his papers and filling pages, and in these very last years, with the useless hand and the tired body, the mind that would not rest was drawing the deluges, the great swirling storms of water pouring down over the world, whole pages of curling, coiling flood, water and wind and the end of things rendered in patient chalk, and dreaming still of order, of how the world was put together, of the mathematics under the mess of it all. The man could not lift his brush, and he was drawing the apocalypse and the harmony of the universe in the same trembling breath. Let that be the picture of him you keep. He never once, to the very end, stopped wanting to know. And the end, when it came gently, the way you would wish it for anyone you loved. In the spring of 1519, in the last week of April, feeling the nearness of it, he did the careful, orderly things a careful, orderly man does, though he had left so much else undone. He made his will. He set out what should go to whom, the vineyards and the money and the cloak, the little bequests, the arrangements for the poor, the masses to be said. And to Melcy, to his beloved Melcy, he left the greatest thing of all, the thing worth more than any of it, though perhaps not even Leonardo fully knew how much more. He left him the books. He left him the notebooks, the thousands upon thousands of pages, the whole record of the looking, the entire contents of that endless, questioning mind, set down in the backwards mirror script that only he wrote and few could read. And then, on the 2nd day of May, in the year 1519, at the manor of Clou, at Amboise, in the soft green valley of the Loire, far from the Tuscan hills where he had begun, Leonardo da Vinci died. He was 67 years old. There is a legend about how he died, and you know by now how we do with the legends. We hold them up to the light and we say, whether it happened just so or not scarcely matters, for they told it, and they told it because it meant something true. The legend is that the young king, Francis, was there at the end, that he came and he cradled the old man's head in his arms as he passed, that the greatest mind of the age died held against the breast of a king who loved him. The careful historians will tell you the king was likely elsewhere that day, away on the business of his kingdom, and they are probably right. But hold the story anyway, softly, the way you would hold a candle, because whether or not the king's actual arms were there, the meaning of it was true, entirely true, that this man who had been born unwanted and unschooled and shut out of the door his father walked through, this illegitimate village boy, ended his life so honoured, so cherished, so loved, that the people of his time could only imagine his passing as a king holding him tenderly at the end. That is what the legend is really telling you. Not where the king stood, but how much he was loved. And then Melcy took him home. Faithful Melcy, grieving, gathered up the pages, all of them, the thousands of sheets, and carried them back over the mountains into Italy, and kept them, and tended them, and tried to make sense of them, all his life, guarding them the way you guard the ashes of someone you loved. And after Melcy the pages scattered. This is the last great turn of the story, and it is a strange and beautiful one. Because the notebooks did not stay together. Over the centuries they were divided and sold and lost and found, carried off to Milan and Paris and Madrid and London and Windsor, bound into codices hidden in libraries, some surely lost forever, the mirror writing unread for generation after generation. The drawings of the flying machines and the flowing water and the child curled in the womb and the heart with its valves lying in the dark, waiting. And slowly, slowly, over 500 years, the world caught up to what was written in them, and understood at last that this one man, alone, in secret, in his backward hand, had seen the circulation of the blood and the working of the heart, and the possibility of flight and the layering of the earth, and 100 things the rest of the world would not arrive at for centuries. The unfinished man's unfinished pages went on teaching the world long, long after he was gone, and they are teaching it still. Now let us do the thing we said we would do all along, at the very end, and only at the very end. Let us go back to the boy. Do you remember him? At the very beginning of this long night, before all of it, before Florence and Milan and the horse and the wall and the smile and the king, there was a boy alone in the Tuscan hills, and he had come to the mouth of a great dark cave, and he stood there, bent between two things, between the fear of the blackness, the cold breath of the unknown pouring out of the dark, and the desire, the burning, aching desire to know what marvel might be hidden inside. We left him there, suspended, all those hours ago. And now you know what he did. Now you have watched his whole long life, and you know the answer, because you have seen him make the same choice, over and over, every single day of the 67 years. He chose desire. He always chose desire. He chose to walk toward the dark thing he did not understand, and to look at it until it gave up its wonder. He walked into the cave of the human body and drew what no one had drawn. He walked into the cave of moving water, and the cave of the flying bird, and the cave of the smiling face, and the cave of the storm. And every time, he chose the wanting to know over the fear of the dark. And here, softly, is the answer to the question we set down at the very beginning and carried with us all night long, the puzzle of how an unschooled village boy came to see further than any man of his age, and why he left almost everything he ever began unfinished. Here it is, and you may let it settle over you like a blanket. He saw further than anyone because he wanted to see, more than he wanted anything else, more than he wanted to finish, more than he wanted to be safe, more than he wanted to be understood. And he left everything unfinished for exactly the same reason, because he loved the question more than the answer, because to finish a thing is to stop looking at it, and he could never bear to stop looking. The unfinished horse, the flaking supper, the lost battle, the smile he never delivered, the thousands of pages of questions with no reply, these were not his failures. These were the very shape of his gift. A man who finishes everything has decided the world holds only so much wonder. Leonardo never decided that. He died still wanting to know, and because he died still wanting to know, he left the world more wonder than any man who ever finished everything he began. His unfinished questions were his greatest finished work. So there he is, at the last, and you may hold the two of them together now, side by side, the way we promised. The small boy at the mouth of the cave, trembling, wanting, choosing to go in. And the honoured old master in the warm French house, the king at his knee, the beloved pupil at his side, the paintings he could not part with resting in the next room, the tired hand that could no longer paint still drawing the water and the light. They are the same person. The whole long life runs between them like a single held breath, and it was, from the first day to the last, one unbroken act of love. The love of looking, the love of the world, the love of the question itself. It is all told now, the whole long life, from the hillside near Vinci to the manor at Amboise, from the first drawing to the last deluge, is finished, laid out end to end in the dark, and there is nothing more you need to hold. You may let all of it go now, the names and the places and the paintings, let them drift and blur and settle, the way the day settles when you finally stop turning it over. You do not have to remember any of it. The story will keep. Leonardo kept his wondering to the very end, and now you may set yours down and rest. Let the lamp burn all the way low, let your breath go slow and easy, let your shoulders come all the way down and your hands come loose, and the whole weight of you sink softly into the warmth of where you lie. The boy has gone into the cave, and it was full of light. The old man is at peace, and so may you be. Sleep now, it is all told. Good night.